and welcome to episode 8 of the Retro Critical Podcast, second podcast for July of 2016, and I said I wasn't going to be back, but I couldn't keep away. So many interesting stories and topics to discuss with you in this episode. I'm going to talk about the upcoming release of the NES Classic. It was just announced a couple days ago. I'm going to talk about some Nintendo NX rumors. Got a hardware update for you, kind of continuing with the theme that I established last month, and that is striking the right balance in building or finding a home theater PC. I felt compelled to discuss with you my first experiences with VR, specifically with the Oculus Rift. I'm going to talk about the PC Engine and why I think it is a fascinating and vitally important part of gaming history. And then I had the opportunity to do something that I thought I wouldn't be able to do, and that is to interview one of my inspirations for coming on YouTube and starting a podcast. I'm going to interview the incomparable Johnny Millenium here on the show, so stick around. We start now. So we had an interesting bit of gaming news here at the end of July. That is that Nintendo is releasing a mini NES for the holiday season. It is a small replica of the original Nintendo Entertainment System in the same style box that I remember. It comes with one controller and HDMI connection, actually one sort of NES replica controller, and then you can plug in classic controllers from the Wii and the Wii U, and just hook it up to an HDMI HDTV and relive 30 classic Nintendo games. And I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I would say the list was representative of a lot of the classics and maybe a few games that I guess the mainstream may not be familiar with, but I think they were all logical choices. And I think this is a terrific idea. It's going to be a hot seller. It's $60. It is an automatic impulse buy. And for someone like me who has owned every Nintendo home system, I will have to pick this up. And very much looking forward to it. What I think it represents for the future of retro gaming is perhaps a little broader than just the fact that there's this cool new product that we can pick up for a relatively low price. I've argued on this podcast, on the YouTube channel, in forums, that in order to make retro gaming fresh for the end user, and yes, profitable for the companies, they have to present retro gaming and retro games in a new context. They shouldn't just treat games as these one-off pieces of software that you can re-download every so many years. There has to be a meaningful context in which to play them again. Now, I think here the context is very simple. Hey, we have this nostalgia-based mini replica console, and we're going to relive unboxing a Nintendo and having 30 terrific Nintendo games come with it. And that's a great start. But I think the strategy has to go beyond just an interesting piece of hardware. Now, we saw something, I think, software-based from Sega in this vein, and that was I'm going to mess up the title, but the Steam Mega Drive front end, the Mega Drive Classics Collection, I think it was called, and I have a video about that here on the channel, and that was an absolutely terrific idea. Basically allowing you to recollect a lot of your favorite Sega Genesis games and actually put them on a shelf in a 90s style bedroom. So those are the sort of things that re-engage interest in these retro games. And, I mean, look, you have a lot of people out there, particularly people who be listening to this podcast, who are active in the retro community, who either own these games or have a file with all the Nintendo ROMs and can play these games for free. So, I've said time and again, what these companies have to do is look at the free alternatives as their competition. If you're just giving me the option of, hey, I can pay $7.99 to play, let's say, I don't know, Super Metroid on the SNES, and I can download that same game for free, yes, illegally, and stick it in a folder and play it for free, the free option, the pirates have won. What you have to do is you have to make the context of acquiring the game so engaging that that's the sale. It's not the piece of software, it's not the bits of code that comprise a retro game, it's what's sold around it. And the classic example is Steam on the PC. Back in 2006, 2007, it was very easy and often a better experience to download a PC game illegally. Even if you bought the copy, at that point you were still, in many cases, buying physical copies of PC games, and you brought it home and you read, oh, it's got Tages, it's got Secure ROM, all these really insidious bits of DRM, or you can just download the cracked version from, I think at that time it was ISO Hunt. There's the option is clear. You're going to get the better version for free. So what Steam did, say, okay, we're going to make acquiring the game, the process of acquiring the game, so much easier, and it's going to cost something, but it's going to be cheap. And we're going to slowly build a community around that. And I think today, and of course there are legal mechanisms that took down things like ISO Hunt and the Pirate Bay and all of that, but even before all of the punitive legal measures were thrown against these sites, it became easier and cheaper and faster and better to buy through Steam. So I think Nintendo and Sega, and yes, whoever owns the rights to the NEC games, although I guess that's many of them are owned by Konami, so that's a hopeless case. But if you really want to monetize these retro titles, give the audience a compelling reason to go back to them. Now, what might that be? I've said that there should be a subscription service where every month, we'll call it the Nintendo Classics subscription, maybe it's $5 a month, and every month games are released maybe in chronological order. So they take you back to, I don't know, July of 1990, and they give you 5 NES games, if 5 came out. And I'm sure they did. Or you arrange it by theme. 1 month sports games, the next month RPGs, stuff like that. And stagger the releases so that we actually have something to look forward to. So that we can enjoy the act of acquiring these games again. Because we've played them all. I mean, it's not just buying Super Metroid doesn't excite me. But if I have some anticipation, and I know that there's this great service, and maybe they make the interface look like a Nintendo Power, and you have the walkthroughs. You could create your own walkthroughs, and it has some basic social features. I actually think that would be a powerful means of generating a lot of interest, and it would work for the older folks who actually got these games back in the day, and I think it would then also engage the younger kids who maybe missed a lot of these great titles. So that's one way to do it. I think the social aspect of it can even be broadened. And what I would like to see is, and I don't know if you guys out there experience this, but when I was a kid, particularly in single-player games or RPGs, one of the ways you played was you went over a friend's house and you passed the controller around. I think if they, as part of one of these subscription services, created a system where I could be paired up with somebody who wants to play the original Dragon Quest, and through the internet we hand the control of the game off from one person to the next, and the other person sort of chats, types in a chat, or they have voice chat and acts as a guide, and you kind of explore the game with someone else. That would be a great way of, again, creating a new type of interest around these old properties. So it can go in a lot of different directions. These are just some thoughts, but I like what Nintendo's doing here, and I think it's going to be very successful. And because of that, I think it's going to start us down the path. I'd love to see how Sega expands the Steam front end for their games, and of course, you could actually change the ROMs. You could hack them and do all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't think Nintendo's going to allow for something like that, but it would be great if a couple of these companies with a deep library really push the envelope on reimagining ways of distributing their retro titles, and I think it's going to be, in that case, a fairly interesting future for this aspect of the hobby. Alright, so July offered us some more Nintendo news, this time in the form of a rumor from the folks over at Eurogamer.net, and they claim to have gotten some inside information on the Nintendo NX. And I usually don't focus too much on rumors, but I kind of trust Eurogamer to a degree. So what they said was that the system would indeed be a handheld primarily, and they showed kind of a mock-up drawing, anyway, of a tablet with kind of Wii U-like controls on the left and right sides, but it showed that they could be detached and that the tablet could actually sort of rest against a kickstand, so you could have multiplayer on the go. The other big news, or in this rumor anyway, the other big part of the rumor was that the NX would be powered by an NVIDIA Tegra X1 chip, which is a chip that's currently in the NVIDIA Shield TV, and I believe the Google's higher-end tablet. I forget what that's called, the something C, Tablet C, something like that. So a fairly capable mobile chip, but a mobile chip nonetheless. So they had actually linked that article to a Digital Foundry piece that talked about the functionality of that chip, and they did some speculation of their own. So this is a chip that was really meant to, in their opinion, balance performance with battery life, and of course that's very important in a mobile device. And if you've used any of the these Tegra chips, whether it's the Tegra 2 or the K1, they were very capable. I mean, even if you looked at a K1, which was in the Shield tablet, I mean, that was capable of approaching PS3 and Xbox 360 level graphics, which on a mobile device is fairly impressive. Now, if they're using the X1, which was released, I think, a year and a half ago, that's pretty dated technology in this time period where mobile technology improves very quickly. So if you think about top-level tablet gaming right now, that would sort of be the place where the where the NX would kind of stop. It would be hard to get more than that, although they did say it will be actively cooled, which leads you to believe that Nintendo could eke out some more power if they wanted to, at least in console mode. and obviously then sort of downclock it for its mobile implementation. The other part of it was that they suspect it will be docked, so it's going to be cartridge-based, as we suspected, and it will dock with some other device, and that's how you'll get it to your TV. Now, what's unclear is if there will be additional controllers, if you will, at that point, separate the controllers and use that as a Player 1, Player 2 controllers, if they'll allow you to use your Wii and Wii U controllers. That wasn't mentioned. I've heard rumors elsewhere that when you dock it to the docking station, at that point it will become more powerful. So some people think that this NVIDIA Tegra X1 spec will only be for its mobile mode, which would be nice. Someone spoke of the Nintendo MX rumor as being the docking station that will add more power. But that doesn't seem like Nintendo. I don't see them releasing a handheld product in March and then saying, oh, you got to buy this docking station that'll make it more powerful. Nor do I see them bundling essentially two consoles in one for, and we don't know what the price is going to be, but you would suspect it wouldn't be over $500. So I don't really believe that. I think it's going to be the guts of the machine, the power of the machine, is going to be in that tablet. And the docking station will just simply be a docking station. Now, the Digital Foundry piece also started kind of wondering, will it really be an X1 or will that be a placeholder for the upcoming X2 chip, which is supposed to release, I think, at the end of this year. And they speculated that because at that point, if that chip, and they said very little is known about it, but they believe it's going to be Pascal-based, and the capability of Pascal, so NVIDIA Pascal architecture, 16-nanometer process, and very capable of delivering high-fidelity graphics at very low power consumption, at a very low power consumption rating, so that would seem to be more in line with a next-gen console. So I thought maybe their source said, okay, yeah, we're using this as of now, but it could be upgraded down the line, which would make sense with a March release. I'd love that to be the case, but it doesn't sort of go with Nintendo's track record. Nintendo historically has taken very mature architectures and implemented them in either innovative ways or simply in very profitable ways. I mean, even going back to the Famicom, that wasn't cutting-edge technology in 1984. So I think probably odds are, if I had to guess right now, that it's going to stick to this spec. And of course, as such, it becomes graphically, technically inferior to the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. And I don't believe that's a problem necessarily. I think Nintendo survives on the strength of its intellectual property, and you could argue that they've made the wrong hardware choice ever since the days of the N64, but they've stayed in business and have become exceedingly profitable. So I'm not so much worried about that. I guess take some issue with the idea that they need to constantly come up with a different, quote-unquote, innovative usage scheme or control scheme. I think a lot of their fan base is tired of that, and if they had just come out and said, hey, we're going to make a moderately powerful, retro-styled gray box with the little candy controller colors that you had on the N6, or on the, well, it was on the N64, but on the Super Famicom, and you're going to be able to play games at significantly greater fidelity than the Wii U. It's not going to be like the Neo or Project Scorpio, but it'll be a reasonable upgrade to the Wii U. I think fans would have been fine with that. And then if they came out and said, hey, we've got a handheld that'll sort of pair up with that in some way, and you could play your handheld games on the television if you wanted to take it that route, people would have been fine. I think, if anything, the Nintendo Mini NES announcement shows you that there's a lot of love out there for classic Nintendo, and if they had taken a turn back to classic Nintendo hardware, I think it may have gone better. Now, of course, two other issues come up, as you read through this story, a lot of the guys at Digital Foundry said that the X1 architecture is so radically different from the Wii U that backwards compatibility is probably not going to be there. It'll be fine for all the virtual console stuff, not an issue whatsoever, but Wii U backwards compatibility probably is not going to happen. And then, of course, you have the question of third-party support. And as we all know, the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, based on AMD graphics technology and the x86 basically PC architecture. So Nintendo, again, making a console that will not be easy to work with for the third parties. Now, I don't find that to be troubling. As I've said many times, I don't really need to play Call of Duty on my Nintendo machine. I don't need to play Assassin's Creed. I think the third-party support that Nintendo really needs are the Japanese developers. Is creating a platform that will allow the Atlases and the Axis companies of the world and Gaijin Works and all of that to have a nice install base and to release their games on the NX. I think Nintendo really should be the place for the Japanese enthusiast gamer. And I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I think that's where they struggle with the third-party support. On the flip side, though, since they are embracing a fairly competent and popular mobile architecture, you might see a lot of mobile games being easily ported. Now, do you want to play those on your television? Arguably not. But something interesting could come out of that. Of course, a lot of indie games. Maybe even Nintendo's own Miitomo and Pokemon Go. So there is some potential there, but that's not the third-party support that you need. A couple of other thoughts on this. I think it's interesting that the home console market has basically, well, Project Scorpio, we don't know what that's going to be, but basically has given itself over to being an extension of mobile platforms, if this rumor is true. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are essentially technically equivalent, some will say, to a mid-range gaming laptop, or even, I guess nowadays, a high-end, really high-end tablet. The idea that the home console hardware is this kind of separate and superior unit to what's available in a portable form factor has faded. And if this is true, now we're having essentially tablet tech just beaming something to a 1080p television. Now, of course, Project Scorpio might change that if it is indeed a high-end PC that can do 6.5 teraflops. I'm not really sure what the Neo will be. I mean, it's going to be able to do 4K, but then again, so can some tablets. I mean, you've got these TV boxes. I reviewed one of them a couple episodes ago from China that can pump out 4K with no issue. So I think, again, it's a credit to the mobile, the advances in mobile technology. On the other hand, it's, from a retro perspective, someone who's grown up with the console being a powerful separate entity, it's kind of sad to see that they're not harnessing what a slightly bigger form factor can offer. Now, will I buy this if this is the case? Yeah, I mean, I think Nintendo just knows how to make games that take advantage of their hardware, even if the hardware is substandard relative to its competition. So I'm not going to get all up in arms just yet. I do think that they have, again, kind of misread the market or misunderstood what innovation is nowadays. I think, and I'm not in this group, but I think a lot of gamers don't want the control gimmick anymore, or if they do want a different way to control things, it's going to be VR. So Nintendo, like I said, I think they needed to either really go all in and come out with a console that is powerful enough to support a VR headset in the future, or they needed to just scale it back, go traditional, touch on the nostalgic vibes that they're so capable of doing, and maybe release a handheld console as kind of a device you could pair it to. So, again, it's all a rumor, and we'll see what happens, but if this is true, and Eurogamer and Digital Foundry certainly seemed confident in their source, it's a surprise. It is, it's not a surprise it was going to use cartridges and be a TV handheld hybrid device, but it's surprising to see Nintendo still embrace a spec that makes it not really compatible with its competitors and puts it, I think, significantly behind its competitors, and will, as I said, kind of irritate a certain portion of their fan base who just wants something different. So we'll see how it plays out. Again, I will certainly pick it up very early in its life cycle, review it here on the podcast, and we'll see what happens. Well, this week I jumped on board with VR. I had my first set of VR experiences, and yeah, just so much to talk about, so much to go over as far as the technology, usability, and so forth. I just felt like I had to do a segment on it. So I think we'll start with the decision-making process. How did I come to decide now is the time to get into VR, and which option did I choose? Well, again, ever since I built my PC and it's VR ready, I thought at some point, whether it was in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, that I would finally get into VR. But I felt no compelling reason to do so right now. So I had been talking to some people, and a number of them told me how amazing it was, and they had used the HTC Vive. So I researched that, and I came to the conclusion that the Vive just wasn't going to work for my setup here. You need, I think, a 5x6 space at the smallest, but of course you can go up to 15 feet by 15 feet, which I couldn't do. And you need to have two, what they call lighthouse boxes, these sensors, on either side of the room, above at least 6 feet in the air, in my case higher. It has to be above head level, and ideally hard mounted. So that's fairly complicated, fairly demanding of a setup process. Now, of course, you can put them on bookshelves and then try to slant them down somehow. You can use tripods, things like that. But I came to the determination that if I wanted to use the Vive, I would have to do one of two things. I would have to clear out furniture from my game room and possibly reposition a bed that I have in here. Or number two, disconnect the computer, move it to my entertainment room, move some furniture in there, and set up tripods. And I honestly felt like my interest in VR wasn't so great that I was about to do that. I don't want to rearrange my house just to play video games. So I looked at other options. I had tried, actually, Google Cardboard, and I was fairly impressed with Google Cardboard. I mean, for what it is, it was a fairly I would say, satisfying kind of experience. Sort of a cheap thrill type of VR. And what I really liked about it was that I could use it without glasses, which was a motivating factor for me. I always assumed that I would need to use my glasses to really see things, but I figured, Google Cardboard, I got the Prowess headset, and was able to see things actually really well. So a little bit more about glasses later. So obviously PlayStation VR has been in the news, but underpowered, so that left me with the Oculus Rift. And what I noticed about the Rift was that it had, and I didn't realize this because Facebook owned it, I wasn't paying attention, but it really has the same specs as the HTC Vive, but for more of a seated or standing type of experience, which is exactly what I needed for my game room. And then, of course, at some point you will be able to upgrade to room scale. It was, I think, $200 cheaper. So I went with it. I went with the Oculus Rift. And I got it home, a very sleek, nice package. Tested it out for 2 days, and I have to say that I was, I don't want to say bitterly disappointed, but strongly disappointed, put it that way, by what I found. Now, part of this critique is purely subjective, and part of it has to do with the industry and how VR has been rolled out. So I'm going to start with a couple of industry points, and I'll move on to my own subjective experience. So as we know, a lot of VR content is either sort of a free kind of demo, very kind of short experiences, and very few actual full games. Now, Oculus actually has the reputation of having a lot of good games in their store. So that was one bonus. When I fired it up, they sort of give you this extended demo, and it was really, really impressive. And I really will say that when I got this home and unpacked the box, I had that feeling of unpacking a new console, and really with a sense of excitement about the unknown, about the tremendous worlds that I could be transported to. And of course, that was a feeling you had a lot in the retro days, when you opened up that Super Nintendo and it felt like this true new piece of technology that was going to take you places. Well, I had that feeling, and certainly when I got into that demo, I was not floored, but I was impressed by what I saw. They show you a sort of progressive set of demos where you look at an alien, a T-Rex is attacking you, where you're on the top of a skyscraper looking down. All of it really tremendous, and the setup process was easy. Just plug a few things in, point the sensor at your headset, and you're good to go. It came with a game called Lucky's Tale, which is a wonderful little game, very much an homage to Super Mario 64, incredibly well done, fun to play, and a nice demo of the technology. But then beyond that, what do you play? There's that Eve Valkyrie, which didn't really appeal to me, and I wasn't going to pay $60 for it. There was a Chronos RPG. But what I did have were a lot of the racing titles that took advantage of VR. Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, and Dirt Rally. And so I fired up those games, and what I found was a less than stellar experience. Basically, the resolution is such, it's so low, that if you're used to playing these games on a monitor, particularly now in my case a G-Sync monitor, where they're running at a buttery smooth 144 FPS, you drop it down to 90, which is still good, but you're really, it's a noticeable drop in visual fidelity from a 1440p monitor down to this essentially 1080p per eye type of situation. So it didn't run well, it didn't look good, and it felt, I hate to say it, but kind of like a gimmick. I mean, you could tweak things, and things like Assetto Corsa and Project Cars would look acceptable, but for all the tweaking that it it took, I just felt like, it wasn't impressive, as impressive as playing it on a good computer monitor. Plus, I found that it required, in the case of Assetto Corsa, like doing some remapping of buttons. I had to lift the headset up and remap, and Project Cars as well. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to accept that and move on and do some other things with it. So, of course, if you download, and you can do this with Oculus, download Steam VR and boot into their kind of virtual space. And they have a VR theater mode, which will allow you to run your Steam games on kind of like a movie theater screen in the VR world, which I really liked. And actually, that was a use case that I was really excited about, because I could, even though the VR content was out there, if it's a high-quality screen and you can play these games on like a massive 130-inch display, that would be great. So I tried that, and it worked well for some games. Rocket League was pretty good. And for others, it just created noticeable compatibility issues, particularly with, again, button mapping, where I would play sort of, let's say, Arkham Origins, Saints Row 4, just trying to get that on the big screen in the helmet, and it just wasn't working. I mean, those games were unplayable, some terrible frame rates as well. And of course, these are games that my computer eats for lunch at 1440p. So tweak that a little bit. In some cases, couldn't correct it. And I found that each game that I launched there was some degree of work that I had to do to get it to run close to optimal, and then in some cases it just wouldn't work. Okay, well, let's try Virtual Desktop. So you can download this program from Steam called Virtual Desktop and use Windows in sort of like a big movie theater type setting. That's really in space, and it sort of wraps around your vision, and you can make the screen as big or small as you want to. And I found that I had a number of problems with this. Again, I'm going to talk about the subjective experience part of it. But just from a purely objective standpoint, again, at a lower resolution, it really looked pixelated. And to kind of correct the pixelation, you had to either shrink the screen down, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a massive screen, or you had to really sort of lean in and stare to even see what you were looking at on the web. And then, of course, you have this idea of, well, now you got to type, so you really can't see the keyboard. So, again, kind of lifting. I mean, trying to, like, compose an email, very difficult. Again, if you are not, I wouldn't say even if you can't see the keyboard, but if you're not oriented properly, it just wasn't. I mean, it was a nice piece of software, and it was a good idea, but for pure Windows usability, I couldn't see myself using that for an extended period of time. I also found Steam VR was not flawless to set up. It wasn't recognizing the Xbox One controller initially. I had to constantly sort of reposition my head, sort of reset where I was in space. I mean, maybe it's just more attuned to the Vive. So, yeah, it wasn't a great experience right off the bat. And because I wasn't going to sort of just shell out $20, $40, $60 for all the different Oculus games, I kind of found myself rather immediately asking the question, what am I going to do with this? For as incredible as as it was to kind of step into a couple of these demo worlds or look at 360-degree video of all sorts, sort of find yourself in Europe and look at the vistas and stuff like that. For as fun as that was, I just couldn't see myself consuming that meager amount of content on a regular basis. So, and then of course, again, you had this issue where everything that I wanted to do required an amount of tweaking. Now, of course, I like to tinker with things, but ultimately I like to get them to work. And I never really found a situation where I could just dial in some settings. Again, unless I was in the Oculus store, dial in settings and just put it on and have a VR experience. It always took more work to the point that it became irritating. Now we're going to get to the subjective stuff. And again, this is relative to me. So this is not a downside of the Oculus Rift per se. I think your mileage is going to vary depending on your circumstances. But at least for me, I have glasses, and I have a fairly strong prescription. And I found that unlike Google Cardboard, I really needed the glasses here. I could not see anything without the glasses, and it was a struggle to get the Oculus Rift on over the glasses. It took, basically had to unhinge everything, undo all the straps, and then I could just about get it on, and then I could sort of position it and close the straps. And what I found was that, again, due to the nature of my frames, it was just very tight and very painful. It was just pushing down on my nose and creating like a sinus headache if I used it for longer than 30 or 40 minutes. In addition to that, as someone with a very strong prescription and a very complicated prescription, I'm forced to get essentially the most expensive lenses on the market. Some sort of fancy progressive lens. And and maybe this isn't the case everywhere, but at least here in my part of the United States, when you have to buy those types of lenses, they come with a anti-glare coating. And at least for me, at least where I get my glasses, it's not an option to not get the coating. If you want a relatively thin, modern-looking lens, you don't want to look like you have Coke bottle glasses, and you step up to that level of lens, you're getting that coating. And if any of you have that, what you'll know is that it smudges very easily. And so there's a fair amount of smudging of the lens to even get it on, get the headset on. And I also found that as you're playing a game, as you're perspiring, or as you're constantly, or at least I was sort of repositioning it on my head, that those smudges became very distracting. And I found myself, okay, I got to take the headset off, clean the lenses, put it back on. 10 minutes later, I'm back in that situation. And so it was almost impossible to read text. That's why I said with the virtual desktop, in addition to it being very pixelated, I found it, after a while, I couldn't read any text. So now I've got to constantly take the thing off, clean the glasses, put it back on, and it was never a clean fit. And so what happened after the first day of doing that is that the face guard that comes with the Oculus Rift started to tear off a little bit because I was, it was catching the glasses as I was putting them on. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And so it was such a delicate process to kind of to get the perfect position over my glasses and strap it in. And then when I strapped it in, it was painful. And then if I had to remove it to clean my glasses, you could see the problem. Then there are apparently 3 manufacturing peculiarities about the Oculus Rift. Some people say they exist on the Vive as well, to a greater or lesser degree. But they were there. And one is the screen door effect, i.e. pixelation. And as I said, that is an objective fact. These are pixelated displays. I didn't find that bothered me too much. And in fact, I think there's an opportunity, at least for this first wave of VR, to actually go back to the 8-bit or 16-bit art style, where pixelation was kind of accepted, and kind of use that aspect of the technology as part of the aesthetic design of these games. So that didn't bother me. Then you have, I guess they're called God rays, or these basically, with certain patterns of light, it would look like there are beams of light shooting into your eyes. So kind of very distracting. And some people are really bothered by these. If you read the forums and stuff like that, read the Oculus and HTC Vive or Reddit, subreddits, Some people hate this. For me, it was, yeah, I mean, it existed, and it was bothersome, and it kind of gave a fog to certain scenes and certain content. Now, it was magnified by the fact that I had actual smudges and fog in my field of vision from the glasses, but even with that, I could have lived with that. Then there was also when a scene was pure black, like loading, transitioning from one scene to the other, you could see like a red or purplish haze or line in your field of vision very briefly, and then the picture would come on and everything would be fine. So, those defects are there. They are real. Again, if the thing fit and it was comfortable, I could have lived with that. That really wasn't an issue. But it one of the things I realized as being someone with compromised vision. By the way, these are my real glasses, not the sunglasses. Just so you know, I do wear other glasses other than sunglasses. For those of you who watch the channel and have only seen me in sunglasses. Anyway, as someone with compromised vision, I want virtual reality to succeed. I want to enjoy it, and it became clear that what we have here is a product that is going to be good for most people, but is not really going to be a fit for everyone. And I just think people should know that going in to VR. Now, I know some people have simulation sickness, stuff like that. I didn't have that. But, that's something that you're going to want to take into account when you buy these things. You have to remember, optics are a very kind of precision-crafted instrument. When you, as I had to my whole life, go have these very complicated glasses made, it's not a one-size-fits-all process. It's not an easy process. You have to, at least in my case, wait for 2 weeks. As they send them off to the lab, I'm never going to get the 24-hour glasses. And so people who buy a kind of high-end optics require a certain degree of customization, of tailoring the optics to them. So, the Dev Kit 2 of the Oculus actually had different lenses that you could try out. I think it's a shame that they didn't do that. Now, they say that the Vive is better in that regard with glasses, but also they say it's worse with the screen door effect and pixelation and has a lower field of view. If that bothers you, I didn't find it. I find it very difficult to be bothered by very slight changes in field of view. I've obviously going from like 60 to 90. Yeah, then I'll notice it. But so I think they really have to make a consideration for people with glasses and really tailor these things in order. And I'm not saying that they have to have you get a prescription to use them, but just give you a little bit more space. Maybe have different adjustable lens options like they did on the Dev Kit, or at least give you a little bit more, I guess, width to accommodate larger glass frames. And mine aren't huge, and they were within the tolerances listed on the Oculus website, but just within the tolerances. So I would say definitely test this out if you have glasses before you buy it. I didn't have the opportunity to do that. It was nowhere in my immediate vicinity, so I just had to kind of buy it blind, as it were. So what's the verdict here on VR? I think whether you look at the paucity of content, whether you look at the limitations, the technical limitations of these top-of-the-line devices with the Rift and the Vive, and as you take into account the anatomy of people and how everyone's body, everyone's eyes are not going to cut it for VR, I think what you have is very much a first-gen, early adopter technology. I don't think we're at a point yet where you're just, hey, I'm going to put this on and play. And we're going to get there. And when you get it to work, when you dial it in, it is amazing, and it has so much potential, and it is the next step. But I think, in all fairness, if we really want to be fair about it, right now it's not there. And I coming at it from somebody who basically, I've got the computer, I've got the monitor, I've got the game system. So for me, it was like, oh, this is another kind of piece of gaming hardware that I can buy and test out and enjoy. So I had that experimental mindset going in, but I feel like if you've been saving up, if money's tight, if you have that $600 or $800 available, and you really believe that the dream of VR is here and you want to spend your money on it, I would say don't. There's so many better things you can do in gaming with $500 to $800 that wait for the technology to mature. And of course, I knew that going in, and I was expecting things to be a little bit rough around the edges, but I would say it's really rough around the edges. And like I said, even when it works well. And it's not like it's buggy or it doesn't make you nauseous. I mean, I think the basic hardware spec is there, but when you only have a handful of things to do with it, it's not going to be a satisfying experience. So I think it's an aspirational technology. We put the headset on and we see these images for the first time, and we really are living a dream that we had when we were kids. That having been said, it is still a shallow experience. Once I went through the Oculus VR testing suite, as it were, I would never go back and look at it again. I might show it to a friend or something, hey, check this out, but I can never see myself just going up to the top of that building and looking out at that vista. I took it in, it's cool, unless I was testing something or testing a new graphics card or something like that. I couldn't ever see myself doing that again. For as good as Lucky's Tale was, and I didn't beat it, but I played through a good bit of it. Would I go back to that? Was it such a beautiful world that I felt like I needed to go into it more than a few times? I don't think so. And then for the titles that I was interested in, when you take something like Project Cars, which is a completely underrated game and one of the most technically demanding and brilliant and beautiful games on any platform that really just shines on a good PC, it was severely compromised in the Oculus Rift. So I would caution people. I would say that don't allow your dreams to cloud what these products are right now. And I understand why they were released. You have to, if VR is going to be anything, you really have to develop a market for it. And you have to do that with hype. You have to get the true believers on board to evangelize this stuff. But I think for the average consumer, for the person who's concerned about what they're spending their money on, I don't think in good conscience these products could be recommended. So where does it go? What if, obviously we've built the foundation, what would the dream VR tech be? Where does it need to go before mass adoption becomes possible? I think it has to be wireless. And I know that's asking a lot. It's a ton of data to transmit wirelessly. And obviously with the HTC Vive, you've got a lot more wires coming out of your head than even with the Oculus Rift. But you've got to get it so that you have this device, it's sitting on a shelf, you turn it on, it pairs with your computer, or it's its own computing device in the display, and you're off and you're running. Input methods. Now, I didn't try, obviously, the HTC Vive touch controllers. The Oculus touch controllers have not been released yet, so I was on a mouse and keyboard, their little remote, and the Xbox One controller, and It was okay, but I think you need some sort of controller that can function like a traditional game controller, and then maybe sort of break apart into the dual hand controllers, something like that. There has to be an easy control solution that you can use with this wireless display. It has to be 4K per eye. I think you want to get it to have true immersion. You want to get it to the point where you're not going to see those pixels at all. And I think also you want to get it above 90 hertz. 90 hertz is good, but maybe 120 hertz, maybe 144 hertz. And again, these are dream specs. I mean, to actually accomplish that, I don't think we have the consumer technology to do it. But if you had all of that and it was wireless, you wouldn't need to, well, you may need to put the sensor somewhere, but you have to get a better sensor system. So that, I think asking people to mount VR sensors as you would, say, a rear surround speaker, it's a big ask. And I don't think the average consumer is going to do that. So I think the Oculus is in the right direction. A little USB thing, plug it in, and just point it from whatever any direction at your head, and you're good to go. And the tracking was pretty good. All that stuff, I think, and of course you need content. I mean, I can't forget that. You need serious content, and you need a better system for enjoying 2D HD content in the device. I don't think, again, based on what I've seen with Virtual Desktop and stuff like that, the Steam VR Theater, I don't think that's there quite yet. Again, possible with some titles, not possible with others, but it has to be a thing where you put it on, you boot into your media library, games, photos, videos, and you just click play and you're good to go. It's seamless, it's complete, it's customizable in a way that it's not right now. So, yeah, I know it's negative, and of course you would expect a bit of negativity from the Retro Critical podcast, but I like to think of it as critical realism. This is a wonderful technology. It's the beginning of, I think, an incredible era where we can actually do this, and where we're going to basically have these devices that can transport us to other places. But I think in fairness to the consumer, you have to say that this is still a product for a very niche audience, and it is not a mainstream product. It's gotten up to the point where it can be released as a mainstream product, but it's not there quite yet. So as I was planning the segment and thinking about my time with the Oculus Rift, I was trying to come up with the right analogy. Where exactly is VR relative to new technological releases over the past 20 or 30 years? And it was a tough question, because I want to be fair to it. I want to, but I also want to be honest about what the experience is like right now. And I think I've given a lot of information thus far that I think might help people make a decision one way or another. But it hit me. The best way that I can describe my experience with VR today was to think about my experience with the internet in 1995 or 1996, when my parents first got online. And it's, I think, the fairest, the most hopeful, and also the most honest comparison. So if you think back to 95 or 96, what was it like to use the internet? Well, it was a relatively new technology to the masses and at that time. And it required not only a fair amount of tinkering, but a fair amount of setup to get online. Now, what did you have to do? Obviously, you'd get those discs in the mail, you'd have to sign up. And then for many of us, we had the 28K modem, and you'd have to go around the house and say, okay, Mom, Dad, are you going to be on the phone? Can I use the internet for a half hour? Okay, they're not going to make any phone calls, but hey, if your father has to call a client, blah, 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 then you're going to have to get off. So you would try to block out time. Oh, can I finish dinner early while you guys are still talking? Can I go up and use it? You'd have to wait to get online. You'd get online. It was slow to load content, and I'm trying to give it to you not from the perspective of hindsight, but even then, at 28K, if you were loading anything other than text, took a long time. If I recall, I think we had America Online, so you weren't really going out into quote-unquote the internet. You were the internet was contained and presented through the America Online program, and so you could kind of just more or less do what they gave you, and it expanded a little bit since then. You had video. You could quote-unquote stream video. I remember the little embedded real-time player, something like that. Like you would see video game footage, maybe on like very early IGN, and you'd click and you'd wait and you'd wait and you'd wait and you'd wait for maybe a minute of band quality video. So there were a lot of hindrances to actually get online and use the internet productively. Maybe your online session, at least when I was a kid, would be like, okay, I'm going to go on America Online, I'm going to check my email because I only knew 2 other kids that had email, I'm going to look at the sports scores, I'm trying to read up on video games, and then I'm going to disconnect and get off. And it was wonderful. That time that you were in cyberspace, when you had not been in cyberspace before, was remarkable, but it was also kind of a hassle to do anything fun. And then, of course, I'd be like, well, can I get on the computer? Of course, this is back in the days when there was one computer, so you had to share it with people, and then I would always figure out, like, oh, if I can try to stay awake, wait for my parents to go to bed, and then get onto the computer and try to search out what was on the internet. This is a little bit later, of course, when you weren't tied to AOL and stuff like that. So if I wanted to read up on GameSpot on something, or if I wanted to print out a FAQ, or even search out ROMs, which I really remember doing in like 96, 97 when ZSNES, when I first found out about that, it was a long process, and it was a tedious process, but it had an incredible amount of potential. You could see the potential there. And even though you said to yourself, oh, hey, for the next 40 minutes to an hour, I'm going to be on the internet, and I'm going to do something else. It wasn't connected into your life the way it is today, but it was still fun, and you could still see the promise and potential in using it for the limited periods of time which it was available. And I think that's where VR is. I kind of felt like, all right, I'm going to put the headset on, and I'm going to expand what my computer can do, what my computer can show me, what kinds of information and experiences I can access. But it was so frustrating and required such a degree of setup, especially with the games, that I found, okay, I've tried it, tested it out for an hour, put it down, I'll come back later. Maybe I want to look at, okay, what are these 3D movies, or what are these 360-degree traveling videos that are on the Oculus store? I'm going to download that. Not that great. Okay, put it down, come back to it. So I don't think that's an indictment. I just think that's where it is. And if you're the type of person who will be satisfied with that 40 minutes, with that hour, and or in some cases maybe you like the 3D movies or something like that, like 3D Pixar movies, or you are drawn to something like Valkyrie, or you haven't played some of the higher end racing titles at the highest spec, and so putting it in VR is equivalent to the type of resolution and performance that you've had before, then it may work. But I think if you use the internet in 95 or 96, you kind of said to yourself, and I certainly said to myself, imagine what this is going to be in 5 or 6 years. And I think that's where we are with virtual reality. 5 or 6 years from now, if this thing takes off, and I believe it will. I don't know that everyone's going to have a headset in their house and we're all going to live virtual lives. I don't think we're at that point yet, but as a mature technology, as a new way to consume content, it will be amazing. It will, I think, that point equal the hype that we have for it today. And I very much look forward to that. I just think right now, for me, based on all of the factors that I just mentioned, I'm going to have to give it a pass. I will probably sell the Oculus Rift. I honestly can't see myself using it. It's too frustrating for all the reasons I mentioned. And I mean, maybe if it doesn't sell or something and I've got it in a box and there's a killer app that comes out in a month or two, that might be an occasion to hook it up. But my advice would be, if you are the type of person that has the spare money, who maybe wants to test it out against a Vive, or you just want to sort of test the waters with VR, and you do the research, you take everything into consideration, including what I've just told you, then take the risk. You may really enjoy it. And again, not everyone has my visual problems. So again, your mileage is going to vary. I will say, however, if you're if you're a person who really is sold on the idea of VR, sold on the concept, and has been putting the money together and saving, and you think that these Gen 1 units are going to fulfill the dreams and fulfill the hype, I would suggest holding off. They're not at that point yet. I think a lot of people want them to be. I think certainly Oculus and HTC and Steam are sort of putting it out there that they are. I think there's an aesthetic, there's kind of a cultural capital right now to being someone who is using VR or who is programming for VR. That's all in the marketing realm. I think the reality is a little bit different, and I would just say hold on to your money for now. Check back in a year, check back in 2 years, but I do think certainly 4 to 5 years we're going to have something really special. Alright, now let's do the hardware update, and this is a continuation of the hardware update that I did in the last episode. And in that update, I'm going to talk about two things, but the first item was the Kangaroo PC, a small, basically cell phone-sized Windows 10 PC that I wanted to add to my home theater as a small form factor streaming device / home theater PC. And I ultimately returned it because, as cool as it was, and it is a very useful, very functional, I think, travel computer, it just didn't serve the purpose of being a home theater PC. So I was looking around the house, and I had a bunch of sort of PC parts laying around, and I thought, should I attempt to build my first home theater PC? And I was looking at different, I didn't have a case, so looking at different cases and stuff like that, and they were all quite large, and it would have been very difficult to fit a custom-built home theater PC into my entertainment center. So I was kind of looking around, and I stumbled upon a sale over at Dell, and what they were selling was the very first Alienware Alpha, basically Steam box, although this wasn't the Steam OS version, this was the Windows 10 version. And I said, I think it dropped down to $399. And I looked at the sort of computer parts I had lying around, and I wound up selling them on eBay and putting the proceeds towards getting this Alienware Alpha, this original Alienware Alpha that debuted in 2014. And so it wound up, in the end, costing me about $120, $150, something like that. Now, I say that because at $399, I saw this as kind of a very cynical piece of hardware, and I think its original price might have been $499. Now, why am I saying that it is a cynical piece of hardware? I think it was Dell/Alienware's attempt to simply profit off of the name, profit off of the branding, but ultimately give you a very unsatisfactory gaming computer, quote unquote. This computer was basically released, and they said that it could compete against the PS4 and the Xbox One in terms of graphical fidelity, so you would have a gaming PC, and it's probably about the size, but it's much smaller than the PS4, much smaller than the Xbox One. Hard to equate it. I guess the thing that it most resembles is a Dreamcast. It's about that size. So I just got the absolute base configuration. That's what was on sale. And you can see why I call this cynical. It has a Intel i3. I forget, it was like T430 or 4310 or something like that. Dual-core i3 processor and NVIDIA GTX 860M. So, mobile graphics card. 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 5400 RPM, I think it was 500 gigabyte hard drive. And the problem here was that this machine was insanely, painfully slow. Very slow to boot, very slow to really do anything. It felt totally handicapped. Now, when you load it into a game, it was okay. Was it PS4 level of graphics? Not really. I don't even think it was Xbox One level of graphics, but it could run, for example, things like Rocket League at 720 with a pretty playable frame rate. Could certainly take care of all of the indie games on Steam, at least 2D retro-styled indie games I was playing. Ease on the big screen, which was great. So I would say, while it wasn't a gaming PC, it was reasonable at playing certain games in the same way a gaming laptop would be. Like I said, this is basically a gaming laptop, but just the lack of RAM and the abysmal hard drive made this thing a pain in the ass to use. So I wound up putting a little bit more money into this and getting a 250 gigabyte SSD and 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is a little overkill. I mean, you could have gotten this upgrade. I think the upgrade cost me about $130. So add that to the cost, but that's because I don't know why I did it. I could have easily gotten a 120 gigabyte SSD and just a single stick of 8 gigabyte RAM and for under $100. And come away with still a more functional system. But once I did the upgrade, it was pretty cool. You took this box apart. It was fairly easy. I mean, they didn't make it super accessible, but it was clear that they expected, I think, people to upgrade this thing. So it was really kind of nice inside. It had these 2 coolers that you could pop off and put in the RAM, and then the hard drive bay was at the very bottom. And it was very easy to replace this stuff. Problem was that it didn't come, and this was this was supposed to be a feature, but it wasn't on the system. It didn't come with their backup and recovery program called Alienware, I think, Respawn. So okay, I downloaded it and whatever, updated it. Took forever, but eventually I got what I thought was a system recovery image before I took everything apart. And it turns out that I didn't get a system recovery image. Basically, they had taken this machine, they did the upgrade to Windows 10, and somehow the recovery software didn't work. There were the recovery software, I guess, was building a Windows 8 image or 8.1 image, even though Windows 10 was installed. Perhaps their respawn software wasn't optimized for Windows 10. I don't know, but basically, I put it all back together and it hangs. It will not load. Windows is broken. So, that's irritating. Tried a bunch of times. Doesn't work. So, what I had to do was actually, you can download Windows 10 unlicensed for free from Microsoft. And I figured, well, I'll put it on there and then I'll call Microsoft and say, look, my hard drive crashed, whatever. But as it turned out, I put it on there and it activated. I guess it saw that I had a license for Windows somehow, and it activated. So I actually got a clean, fresh install of Windows 10. It took me the better part of a night before it was up and working, and I do think that is a severe flaw. So if you get this, if you want to try this out, just know that the process is not seamless to sort of get back to Windows 10. Maybe they'll fix it in the meantime. Maybe people have some more technical knowledge and they can do a bootable image with some other program that'll have better results. But anyway, that's what I found. So by no means seamless from the software side, but very easy to upgrade from a hardware standpoint. And once you get the SSD in, like any computer, it becomes lightning fast. And you mate that with 16 gigabytes of RAM. And so this is now a fast, capable home theater PC. And what I probably should have realized a lot earlier when I was putting together my home theater was that there really is a use case for a Windows 10 home theater PC, or a Mac home theater PC, or even Linux for that matter. You wouldn't think that you would want a PC hooked up to your television, but this is small enough that you can tuck it away. No one's going to see it. I had one of those 2.4 gigahertz wireless keyboard trackpads. Things the Logitech K430, so it's kind of like a remote control. You put it in your lap. It's not heavy, and you can navigate the computer pretty well. For gaming, I bought one of those Microsoft wireless adapters, so I've got the Xbox One controller hooked up to it wirelessly, downloaded Steam, and put a bunch of my Steam games on there that I thought it could run. And it actually will stream games from your main PC. And I have to say, game streaming for me has never really been that great. There's just something, I don't know, with where I am, what the nature of the walls are, but I never got a really clean stream, whether I was using, and I mentioned this in my review of the Steam, whatever that was, that little Steam box that you could get that would just stream games. Streaming with this, I would say, is the best experience, and for a good while I can get a good playable frame rate, and it looks really good, and of course it's coming off of my computer with the GTX 1080, so downscaled to 1080p looks really, really good. However, at a certain point, I would say about a half hour in or an hour in, depending on the game, it just starts freezing. And when I've done it with PlayStation 4, I only get 15 minutes. So I can't explain that, but you might have better results streaming. The other thing that I was really impressed with, kind of a secondary feature, is putting all of my emulators and MAME on there and connecting in my Vulix Fight Stick. I was able to play tons of MAME games on the big screen. And since I've mentioned that in my main entertainment center, I have an OLED television. And one of the things with OLED, obviously you have the deep, pure blacks, and I talked about, I think I did a video on which display technology is better, and I talked about OLED versus, I think, DLP and 4K. And I said the cool thing about OLED, when you have those deep blacks, it actually does a really nice job with retro content, retro anime, for example. Even though people will say, oh, well, its auto-dimming function really kicks in if you watch anime. I think that's with modern sort of computer-generated anime, but the old stuff that you could really see the black inky lines, I mean, they're pure black, so it kind of pops off the screen. Well, the same thing is true, I'm discovering, for a lot of retro games. where you really get this deep contrast with the black pixels and the color, and so this stuff pops off of the screen in a way that I haven't seen, I want to say, since CRT televisions, but I almost think that this is blacker. So it's kind of, I don't want to say it's breathed new life into these retro games, but certainly revisiting a lot of them. PC Engine in the case of this episode, and SNES, NES, stuff like that, really great. Now, the problem is I'm playing it with an Xbox One controller, not the best controller for retro content, but it's the only controller I can use across the room, so I'm kind of living with that. I don't think it's, as an emulation box in this setup, not ideal, but at least I've got, as I mentioned, a big collection of emulated games, so I don't have to constantly plug in the cartridges and degrade them and stuff like that. So it's nice to do that on the big screen. And I think the other benefit, and why I'm starting to be convinced that a home theater PC is the way to go almost over any other streaming device, is you can get Amazon, you can have iTunes Video, you can access all of the streaming services that you could from a lockdown device, and there's no limitation on it. I don't need an Apple TV to access iTunes content. I can just download iTunes. I don't need a Fire TV box to get to Amazon. Everything is right there. Plus, as I mentioned in the previous hardware update, services that aren't available on the streaming boxes are available on PC. So, for example, the Fox Soccer To Go, Motor Trend, other sports streaming, World Rally Championship, which I subscribe to. Excuse me. That stuff has no app, and yet I can watch that on the big screen. So a definite plus, and also, of course, and you may get upset or not, depending on your disposition, you can enable ad block and get rid of all the ads that you would usually be forced to watch on one of these lockdown home theater streaming boxes. And I use it, and I have no problem saying this, with the live NBC, whatever you want to call it, website, NBC Live Extra, which, while I'm not a huge sports fan, there are things that I like to watch on there. Other racing events, football season, of course, you get a lot of college football, you get the NFL Game of the Week, and on the Apple TV, the last-gen Apple TV and the current-gen Apple TV, this app would constantly crash. You'd watch it for a little while, picture would degrade, it would crash. And then it would do one of two things. You'd reload it, you'd be forced to watch the pre-roll ad again. So you watch the ad, you're watching all the commercials, you're watching the game, it crashes, load it up, 30-second pre-roll ad, which pisses me off. Even worse, it will sort of desync with your cable account, so that for whatever reason you'll want to go watch an event, click on it, and it says, oh, you got to re-register the device. They've never fixed that. So, okay, now that I've got the home theater PC, skip the pre-roll ad, and once I register my cable account, I'm good to go. So things like that. If you find a site that, or an app that's really irritating, you can then, with the home theater PC, click on over that and avoid that. And I think just that ability to watch everything is significant. Now, another thing you could do with this, and I have this in another room, is install XMBC or Kodi, and if you have a collection of video content, say on an SD card or a flash drive, you can actually manage it through, it used to be XMBC, now it's Kodi. A very elegant system, really, for doing that. They have a way to click into TV streams from all over the world. It's a bit sort of complicated with that, and since I'm not a huge TV guy, I'm not really going through all of the steps to say, get television from Germany, Italy, England, but you could do that theoretically if you're committed to it. So you have that option. And then again, all of the Steam games, all of the emulated games, and just the ability to quickly look something up, reference something. So I would say it's a surprisingly functional device, even if you have to upgrade it, and even if I think Dell's intent was to say, oh, Alienware, you'll have an Alienware PC and give you the most gimped possible PC that they could give you. And it's sad because I remember Alienware, when it first came out, first came out probably around 99, 2000, whatever the desktop was at that point that they had released. I remember seeing it in New York City in J&R Music World, if you guys are in the area and you remember that store. And I was just in awe. I was like, oh my god, this computer looks great. It was running some racing game, really crisp graphics for the time. And they just did a brilliant job of branding Alienware. So while I saw through that, I could just build my own computer. I don't need to go to Alienware. As a first purchase, and for me, I wasn't using it for its stated purpose, because it really isn't a gaming PC, but I could see, if you're a kid or something, oh my god, I'm going to get an Alienware. You get this thing home, and it's just not what you think, and it performs pretty poorly prior to the upgrade. It's obviously an issue. The other thing, a point that I have to make, is that the Wi-Fi is not great. I don't know what card they have in there. It is an AC card, but for whatever reason, it's just a little slower than some other devices I have, other wireless devices that I have in the house and in the home theater room. Not a killer. It can still crisp, clear 1080p streams from a variety of sources. You feel it more when you're downloading stuff from Steam. A 15 gigabyte game on my main computer takes maybe 20 minutes to download, and on this thing it took 2 hours. So again, wireless, but on the same connection. So yeah, that's again, it's a surprise. I can't tell you that I recommend Alienware specifically, but I think there is a place for a functional, strong form factor, a small form factor PC. And this was, again, a little expensive. I mean, if you're paying in this case, $399, and you didn't sell off a bunch of computer parts to fund it, plus you gotta kick in maybe an extra $80 to $100 for the hard drive, it's, you're in that territory where you could probably just stick a tower behind there and get even better performance. I think also Alienware has very recently updated this with AMD graphics card and some newer 6th gen Intel processors, but I think those are about $600. So it's I actually think there's kind of a hole in the market at this point. You have a lot of Intel Compute Stick type things, Chromebox, basically Chromebooks that you can attach to your television, and they're not quite functional enough to do all of the stuff that this Alienware does, but there's also no competitor between $300 to $400, at least that I'm aware of. And then you're jumping up to $600-700 for the more capable versions, all the way up to, I think, $1,000 if you want a GTX 960 and an i7 Generation 5 i7 processor, which then, of course, you're saying, well, at that point, I'm in PC build territory. I can do that myself. So I can't recommend it to everyone, but again, everyone's not going to have the space constraints that I have. So you may build your own home theater PC, and basically a lot of the cases that I found looked like receivers. I just didn't have room for another receiver, but if you do have room, if you got a nice rack or something like that, equipment rack where you could just sort of fit this in, it's a brilliant option. And then, of course, you can, at that point, with I think some of these micro ITX cases or micro ATX cases, you can fit sort of real serious graphics cards in there. And at that point, you've got a really nice functional PC. And I actually think this is a market segment. Part of the other reason why I'm bringing it up, I think it's a market segment that is going to expand with VR. Because if we really go to room scale VR, and you want to do it in your living room, which I think is where a lot of people are going to find the space. And you don't want to carry the home theater PC into there. You could see yourself building, and of course at that point it's going to be probably even a little bit bigger than a receiver because you're into the higher end power supply and graphics card and stuff like that, but you could kind of fit that in and have a dedicated, fairly functional VR box. Probably not as good as a standard tower, just because of the heat and the size constraint. But you could have it right in your living room. So I'm hoping that someone comes along, and especially as something like the Pascal architecture, AMD tries to get VR into a lower price, you can build some of these boxes, and you may actually have a kind of delayed but very cool Steam box. You can have all your Steam games, you can play some VR, and then you have the home theater PC functionality. So I'd like to see it go in that direction. For now, though, I think I will enjoy this device. It was a pleasant surprise, if not one that I can recommend.
Well, Nintendo has sort of owned the video game market for the past several years, but new 16-bit game machines from NEC and Sega are challenging Nintendo. Here to show them off are Al Nielsen, Vice President with Sega of America, and also Bob Faber, Vice President with NEC Technologies. Paul?
Al, help us understand the differentiation between these game systems and the same games played on PCs. What are the relative advantages of playing a game on a game system?
Well, the important thing is that the game systems really are optimized. We've built the graphic chips to really work well with games in terms of moving objects quickly around on the screen, really increasing the resolution of what you can do, the mixing of colors, really putting them all together on a more optimized basis.
So you're throwing all the processing power into doing one particular task. All right, speaking of which, you've got a couple games up there on your Genesis machine, and I guess what our viewers are interested in is how this is really better than what they've seen before. So if you can sort of focus on that as you run through a couple of games.
Well, the first game I have here is Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, which was actually designed by Michael himself. The important thing was really trying to make as animation-like quality, cartoon-like quality in a video game, not small moving characters. Show you what we've been able to do, and really, first of all, it's a new genre of video game, dance video games, or music video come to life. We put the quarter in and we start off here in the video game.
Does 16-bit give you more detail, faster motion, better music, all of the above?
Yeah. And first of all, you have real digitized voices. Michael's here is trying to save these kids who've been kidnapped. Listen to one of the girls. There she says, Michael. It's an actual digitized voice in the game. Michael's moves. First of all, the characters are much, much bigger, much more highly detailed in terms of the types of things that you can go and do. Look at the backgrounds, very, very detailed.
And of course, you really do recognize the personality of it. If you didn't tell me who that was, I could recognize that's Michael Jackson.
It's not hard to tell that that's Michael. But all the fun things that you can go and do. One of the things that we've done in one of our commercials is really take Michael's videos and put Michael videos together with the game to show how realistic they are. Look at this guy here taunting Michael with the pool cue. You know he's bad and he's after him. You can't do that on an 8-bit system.
In terms of pricing, what's the console cost and what do the cartridges cost each?
The cartridges are $49.95 on average. The Genesis system here costs $189.95 for the game.
Okay, we have one more game we have time to take a look at. If you
Sure.
could switch that over there, Al.
The one game that we have is Mickey Mouse starring in the Castle of Illusion.
Is this the first Disney character in a video game?
Yes, on the 16-bit system. He has been on other video game systems over the years. But the important thing is this really demonstrates the capabilities of what you can go and do with the 16-bit system. Here's Mickey Mouse, And if you take a look, he really looks exactly like himself. We haven't gone and sacrificed any of the detail on the character at all.
Is this new this year?
This is brand new. It just started shipping within the last couple of weeks. And I want to show you just some of the wonderful animation here of Mickey. He's just walking along, and then the beautiful, brilliantly colored backgrounds as he walks in and the game begins. Here he
So
is.
you're playing off the Disney animation heritage
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty classy.
Now watch this.
backgrounding, yeah.
There he is, and he's just, waiting for it.
here. One of his old moves from the cartoon.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, he's pretty close to the edge there. Let's see, he might have a little problem. Uh-oh! Oh, look at the emotions on his face.
Yes.
That's what's really making the difference between this generation of video game system and the, generation...
And the relative depth of that background, too. All right, you've shown us what 16-bit can do. I want to move over to Bob now and take a look. You've got a CD-ROM player, not a CD-ROM, but a CD player, in fact, compact disc player hooked up to your NEC unit. We want
That's
to take
right.
a look at what additional capabilities that adds to a video game.
What you're able to do with the CD player that's never been able to be done before is increase the graphical content and also have real live music, digital music and voice equivalent to what would be on a CD or on a video disc for graphics.
So the whole game is coming off the CD. I mean, the graphics, the code, the music.
That's right. We use the CD instead of a cartridge as the storage medium for the gameplay, and that comes off immediately into the system. And then the data for the music and for the voice and for the animation comes down in a streaming path from the disc.
And what's that extra interface box cost? Is that very expensive to get into this?
It
I mean,
is.
assuming you already own a CD player.
Well, you have to buy the CD player to go with the system.
Right.
It's $399.
All right, I see the game is up here. And describe what's going on here.
East, the ideal utopia.
This is the introduction of the
Once a
world
country
East.
so peaceful
And
and
what's revolutionary about it is that we're able to have, as you can hear in the background, a real description from a person who brings the player into the game and into the world, and brings them in and gives them the sense of realism and a sense of a real community that hasn't existed before.
So you've got a storybook reader here, which obviously you can't put on a cartridge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
How much is the game?
the game itself is $60 retail.
And I guess you got pretty sophisticated graphics coming off that. They're coming off the CD also.
That's right. They come directly off the CD.
to the empty abyss of infinite
This is an adventure game.
It's an adventure role-playing game. What it really does is push the technology of interleaving data and audio together. It's pushing the pioneer area.
Are there many titles out now on the CD form for the NEC?
We have 6 titles out now on the CD, and we'll have, beginning next year, 1 a month or more.
Bob, we have just about a minute left, and I know you have one other cartridge, got a standard 16-bit game. If you could show us what that looks like
Sure.
on your NEC console.
The second game is called Bonk's Adventure, and it's a real hit game. It's one of the biggest games of this year. Bonk is a lovable character, and again, he's taken advantage of the 16-bit
Rather than a
graphics.
crude, faceless creature, what we have here is somebody that, in the same sense as a Warner Brothers Daffy Duck cartoon, shows some facial personality.
That's right. He's got a real personality. You'll see what happens when he gets hit. His eyes get big. He uses his head. He's a cave dude whose only weapon is his head.
Yeah, so really watching this, I mean, you're looking at, if you don't mind, a kind of Mario kind of thing, only but with more personality, more characters, which you're able to get in here with.
That's
with the
right.
16
More
bits.
realism, more
Yeah.
depth, greater colors.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much. Well, what is the best game system, and should you let your kids play them? Well, we'll ask an expert in just a moment, so stay with us.
Well, part of this episode, of course, dedicated to VR, but the next part dedicated to the PC Engine. And I've wanted to do a PC Engine episode for a long time, and what I've done is I've kind of condensed it a little bit, and I'm not going to go through my personal history with the TurboGrafx as kind of a monologue. I actually have that on my YouTube channel in the SNES versus Genesis video. I did an alternate history on the TurboGrafx 16, and I'm going to go into a little bit of that later in my interview with Johnny Millenium. But at the outset, I just wanted to highlight a couple of unique things about the PC Engine. that I think are worth mentioning. And I wasn't terribly articulate about it when I interviewed Johnny, so I just wanted to come on and do a little segment before we get to that. And the basic premise, the reason why I love the PC Engine is because I think better than any other system, it is a very strong reflection of the cultural context in which it was released. Now, you could argue that any cultural product is a reflection of the time period in which it was released, but I think there's a couple of things that are different with the PC Engine. One is that it was consciously tailored to the Japanese market. Okay, that's a kind of a boring point, but, again, we live in an era today where there are no special, unique, cultural, technological gems that don't make their way around the globe. Everyone has an iPhone. Everyone can get an Android phone. All of the consoles are, even if they're region-locked, all regions get them. So you got to transport yourself back to a time when, with the PC Engine, it was, as the PC Engine, never going to leave Japan. Yes, it came out as the TurboGrafx-16, but in a very altered form. And its life as the TurboGrafx-16 absolutely paled in comparison to what it accomplished in its native country. So you have, interestingly, I think, for the last and really one of the only times where you have a console that is so nationally and culturally specific. Even the Famicom, while it started off that way, had a global intention, or at least a North American intention, I think, that was well realized. The Sega Genesis, for example, actually did very poorly in Japan, but did very well in the United States and Europe. The Mega Drive as well, and Brazil and stuff like that. So, and then of course, as you move forward, N64, GameCube, PlayStation, these are global products. So the PC Engine was the first and really the most successful in kind of a cluster of Japanese-specific video game hardware. And I'm not going to include sort of the Sharp 6800X or the MSX computer and stuff like that, because, they were very, very broad. Again, mostly in Japan. But they weren't specific gaming hardware, although they have a wonderful pedigree. It's comparable to things like the FN Towns Marty or something like that, a console that was really focused on just Japan, obviously. Its predecessor, it was the predecessor of the PC FX, which was so culturally specific that it was a complete failure. But nothing else touched the PC Engine in this regard. Maybe the Japanese Saturn did. That's maybe the closest one. So the question now is, why was it so special that it captured this era in Japan, this era of pop culture in Japan? Well, I think we have to pull back and look at a little bit of historical and economic circumstance. Don't forget, this console came out in 1987, and it's generally accepted that by 1989, Japan went into an economic tailspin. It was the beginning of what is now called the Lost Decade, or the Lost Generation, and depending on what you read and what data you look at, it is an economic downturn that persists until this very day. And what came before it, a period of remarkable rebirth of the Japanese economy, really the first Asian tiger economy that grew at an enormous rate, and very similar to what happened in the United States in 2008. In the mid to late 80s, there was this absolute asset bubble, primarily based in real estate, but also other kind of financial products that were suddenly worthless. And so a lot of the ultra-modern infrastructure of Japan was built when borrowing was very cheap and the price of real estate was just booming. So this idea of Tokyo as an almost, as a high-tech, almost living robotic entity of a landscape that you saw in something like Akira, that actually has some precedent in the actual culture of the time. It's, I think, worth noting that, as controversial as this point might seem to you, if you go back and you look at moments of extraordinary cultural production, again, not just in Asia, Europe, America, and so forth, it tends to happen right before or right after the collapse of that culture. Now, it might be a kind of a temporary collapse, like, take, for example, if you're familiar with the Vienna of the turn of the 20th century, where you had almost all of the important figures who really shaped the 20th century in Vienna at one point or another. So it was called, fin de siècle Vienna, and it actually happened after, right about the time that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was in a state of complete decline and collapse. So I think the culture surrounding Japan, and really the rise of this the virtual worlds created by video games and anime, were, I think, a reaction to, and in a certain sense, a compensatory mechanism for the uncertainty that was going on in Japan at that time. Now, maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but there's a certain quality to the types of media that were coming out of there that really, I think, captured the tension between the promise of technological progress and its danger. Any number of anime dealt with that. And the increasing ability of computer hardware to facilitate a kind of escape from the drudgery of living in this really high-pressured society that, of course, this is all in retrospect, that was careening, that had collapsed and was just sort of careening further into the abyss. Again, it's not just video games. Pachinko, for example, really experienced a tremendous boom during this time, where Pachinko, a kind of absorbing dance of light and mechanical function that kind of almost had a palliative effect on people, where you could just make yourself numb to the world by staring into the Pachinko machine. This was a big deal in the 80s. In fact, I think there was an interview with Miyamoto, who said that at one point, very early in his career, he was just addicted to Pachinko, and he needed to get himself away from it and refocus and re-engage creatively with what he was doing at Nintendo. And I think the PC Engine was a system that was very technologically capable of kind of capturing all of these different forms of media and turning them into games. Of course, you had some Pachinko games. You had a lot of anime properties being adapted into video games that weren't just, we have this game engine, a simple side-scroller, and we're just going to throw something onto the screen and tell you that it's property X or property Y. I think even if you did have a side-scrolling game, the sprites and the colors and the quality of the animation that the PC Engine was capable of putting out, in comparison to something like the Mega Drive or the Famicom or the Nintendo, really made those properties stand out. You think of something like Bubblegum Crisis on the PC Engine. It's a tough game. I don't speak Japanese, so I can't really get past the first sort of intro part of it, but really captured the art style of that great work pretty convincingly for the time. And it was a time of experimentation. It was a time where I think developers finally had the power to explore a lot of these niche genres that they didn't in earlier generations. And then, of course, you add in the Super CD, the PC Engine CD, and now you're able to deepen that experience with real CD sound, and you could actually I mean, think of the introduction to ease. You could create a very convincing 16-bit or 8-bit, whatever you want to call it, depending on what part of the system you're looking at. I know here it was an 8-bit processor with a 16-bit graphics chip, blah blah blah. But you have the ability to create real anime-style in-game animation that was, I think, well done, better done on the PC Engine than it was on the Sega CD. And with it came just a deepening of that cultural connection to what was popular in Japanese media, particularly amongst kids. So Macross and Gundam and all of that stuff. So I think when you go back and you play a lot of these games in succession, you get a taste of that time period in a way that is more engaging, more absorbing, and more immediate than you do with, say, playing the N64 and saying, okay, well, I kind of feel transported to the mid to late 90s America. I mean, your own personal connections to the console will do that, but I don't know, just playing Mario 64, as great a game as it is, I don't think it speaks to any particular cultural circumstance in the same way that the PC Engine did. And so it gave way to, like I said, this ability to experiment. One of the games that I think is really important on the PC Engine that really is a great example of what I'm talking about and that sold tremendously well was a game called Tokimeki Memorial, which is accepted as being one of the first, at least mainstream, dating simulators. It's very kind of basic, so basic, in fact, that someone with rudimentary Japanese knowledge could play it. You basically level up your character in a bunch of different ways by exercising, doing homework, and it's just a very simple calendar system. You do a couple of these activities, you call a girl, eventually you go on a date, stuff like that. I mean, that is a new concept, even if it's not your cup of tea as a game, that was very experimental. And it was... Now, I may have this wrong. It may have come out also on the MSX computer. But it's an example of a type of game that was so well suited to the time. Then you have crazy games like one of my favorites is Pachyo-kun, which was a little pachinko ball, and I think it's called Pachyo-kun Adventure. He goes into space, and you have to save Earth by successfully playing pachinko. So all of these weird Japanese stuff, and then gems like I really think the Batman game is an absolute gem of a game on the PC Engine, basically turning Batman into a puzzle game, a stealth puzzle game, and it is incredibly fun. So it's strange because it's a console that, and of course you can talk about Bonk's Adventure and all the Hudson games, but some of those made their way over here. Of course you had the system's ability to really be the place for shoot-'em-ups outside of the arcade. I think that's really been well covered, although if you love shoot-'em-ups, this is one of the most amazing systems ever released. It doesn't have that kind of cultural legacy. I would even say in Japan at this point, it's kind of been forgotten, how varied and how interesting the library was. And then, of course, it kind of gave way to a doubling down on a lot of these concepts in the PCFX that didn't work out. So that's where I want to leave it and just kind of remember the PC Engine, not as this slightly more interesting counterpart to the TurboGrafx, but I think, at least in my mind, at least from this distance, when I look back at that time period in Japan, as a system that, I mean, certainly challenged Nintendo, pushed them in a way that Sega didn't even do back then in their home market, and a system that represents more than just games that really, if you sit down, you can do this with ROMs, or you can go on eBay and get like a lot of just hue cards if you have a machine capable of playing them, and just go through this and really transport yourself back to that time. And with a little bit of historical context and perspective, the system just becomes so much better to play, so much better to collect for now than it was a couple of years ago. And there's a lot of great literature out there about it. There's a book called The Untold History of Japanese Video Games. I think there's 2 volumes of it. And while these books are a little dry and the interviews aren't, I hate to say they're not insightful, but they'll have a very similar quality to them. But it really does paint the picture of this time in Japan, I think, pretty well. Again, my opinion, you may think I'm reading into it a little bit too deeply, but the more I learn about this time in Japan, the more I go back to the PC Engine, the more I love it. So I've got a little interview segment this week with the incomparable Johnny Millenium, one of the foremost voices on retro gaming. And we're going to talk about the PC Engine, the TurboGrafx 16, and how it was so closely connected to the culture of Japan in the late 80s and early 90s. And I think it was a console that, in a very, I think, unique way, was just a close representation of Japan of that time period. I don't think there's ever been a console that really captured its cultural moment like the PC Engine.
Yeah.
And so, Johnny, what am I just sort of gushing there? Am I
No.
way off on that, or?
No, it's funny when you introduced me, the incomparable. I thought you were going to say the incompetent. John, I was going to fully agree with you. That would have been what I would say. But it's interesting. Like, if we'll lead into it by this. When did you discover the TurboGrafx? When did you first hear about it?
Well, I first heard about it through the initial advertising push. And I've talked about this on my channel. My parents are very anti-Super Nintendo, so I could not have a Super Nintendo. So I had to choose between Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16. And as a kid, I thought to myself, well, hold on. TurboGrafx, I want that one.
Because it sounded cool, didn't it?
Yes. And the kids smiling on the box, I was like, that could be me.
Zach from, Saved by the Bell on there.
Yeah, so that was all the thought that I put into it. And when I got it home and played it for a couple months, I kind of realized, like, all of the great games, all of the iconic franchises that were coming out on the Genesis, on the SNES, I was kind of shut out of that. So I resented it a little bit after I made the decision. But how about you? How did you first hear of it?
I think it was, I 100% know it was in GamePro magazine. And GamePro was a pretty good magazine. It wasn't as good as EGM or Game Fan or anything like that back in the day. But when you didn't have the internet, it was still pretty good. It was probably the last magazine that you really enjoyed, but you'd pick it up anyways because it would have some morsel of information that maybe you didn't get from the other magazines. And as I say, before the internet, magazines were gold. So yeah, I would ride my bike or my skateboard up to the local mall to save on foods. And all the magazines would be there, and I picked up GamePro, and I brought it home, and I was looking through it, and I'm like, whoa. And it was just the photographs they took of these 3 machines. One of them was the PC Engine, which was this beautiful little white machine, looked so sleek, like a designer model type of thing. And the,
Gorgeous looking console.
yeah, so beautiful. I was like, what the hell is this? And the shuttle, the PC Engine shuttle, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a console that looks like a space shuttle. And it was such a foreign, as you were talking about, it's such a foreign concept between the West and Japan. Like Japan was so in their own bubble, and they didn't even care about anybody outside of their bubble. They were just doing their own thing, which ended up being fantastic, but so very foreign and inviting, but strange, you know. But I think the thing that got me the most was that it used credit card sized, games. I was like, this is the same. Back in the 80s, it was always like, if you could get a watch that was a calculator, it was cool. So anything that you could do smaller and more compact was cool, was really cool. And what did you think when you first saw the cards yourself?
I was pretty shocked. I remember sort of opening it up. I don't know if I got it for my birthday or Christmas, but at some point, I had opened it up and I was showing it to my parents. They're like, wait, those are the games, coming from Nintendo where you had the big bulky cartridges. So yeah. I couldn't believe like a game is really on here, but it worked out.
Well, do you mind, like, why did your parents dislike Nintendo so much?
Well, it's funny. When the Super Nintendo came out, I had asked for it, and they said, oh, yeah, and you can play your old Nintendo games on the Super Nintendo plus the new ones. And I probably just sort of lied and said yes.
Oh.
But when I said, oh, no, I have to get new games, they felt betrayed.
Oh.
And it was like, and I don't know why they were so reticent about never allowing me to get a Super Nintendo, but it was just totally off the table. So if I wanted to go into the next generation, it had to be Sega or NEC.
So you must have got a TurboGrafx after the Super Nintendo was released.
I want to say I got it in 91.
Yeah.
91 or 92. I want to say 91 because it came out in 89.
Yeah.
So I think probably 91.
Because the Genesis came out, the TurboGrafx came out, and then the Super Nintendo came out. So
yeah.
And as a kid, how old were you at that point?
I was, let's see, about 9 or 10.
Oh, wow, yeah. I was about 14, 15 years old.
And I was so crushed when I couldn't get that Super Nintendo, but I decided to pour all of my fanboy energies into one or the other, and it was the TurboGrafx. Before I knew anything about it, I just read about it in the magazines very briefly, and it just sounded, okay, Turbo, I'm good to go.
But you had like buyer's remorse. Not that you bought it, your parents did, but you've got a bunch of games, and all of a sudden everybody else is playing like Sonic and Mortal Kombat, and you're like, damn.
Yeah, and Street Fighter and Mega Man and stuff like that. And I had, what was it, Legendary Axe, which was a good game.
It is a good game. I love Legendary Axe.
But, actually it was funny because when I put in Keith Courage for the first time,
yeah,
and I had just been playing, Mario 3 or something, and Keith Courage, like, this is the Pac-In game.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a bad game, but it was just, okay, the sprites are bigger, and I have no idea who this character is, and he's being attacked by these things with guns on their head.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of a letdown.
It's funny if a company nowadays was going to bring over a machine from Japan, I think they do a lot better job of marketing it and picking the right games for it. There was so many great games that they didn't bring over. There were so many bad games that they did bring over. And it was really, like, when you get older to our age and you look back and you're like, what were all these guys, and they all wore suits back then. Businessmen wore suits at TurboGrafx. Like, what were you guys doing?
Yeah, I remember watching, they did a documentary on the old G4 Tech TV. I don't know if you got that up there. And
I know about it, but I haven't seen it.
So they did like a history of the consoles, and they got to the TurboGrafx, and they had an executive, and he said, we were approached by this company, Midway, who wanted to make Mortal Kombat exclusively for the TurboGrafx. Oh. And the office in Japan said, nah, Americans don't want that.
Oh, God, eh?
Now, who knows if that story's true or not, but it's floating around on YouTube.
I know. Could you imagine if they brought over, like, Dracula X and a lot of the really good RPGs from Japan? Like, it could have, I don't know if it would have made a difference, but it could have helped a little bit.
Yeah. I think a bunch of executives sat down and they had a vision of who Americans and Canadians were and what they wanted. Mm. And that vision, I think, was totally off.
Yeah.
Like, even just in redesigning the console, you have this gorgeous, as you said, sleek-looking console, and then it has to be bigger.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. To me, the U.S. North American version didn't look as good.
It didn't, but I guess in my mind, I was, I am kind of like I am now. I was just happy it was coming out. So I was like, okay, it's not as cool as the PC Engine, but it is the PC Engine over here, and that's a good thing. So, and the marketing to me was good because there was a lot of weird Japanese games, and I was into weird Japanese things then, when a lot of my friends and stuff weren't. It felt like a very appealing console to me. And the funny thing is it was in the same magazine with that GamePro, they also showed the Genesis. And I was like, well, I knew the Genesis was coming out, but it was just like, oh wow, look at all these machines that are coming out, and these were also promising, arcade games at home, better looking, and I was like, wow, like that was also another big factor that pulled you into these, is that this was better than the Nintendo, and that meant everything. This is like, oh, this is the next generation, as you were saying, and the Super Nintendo wasn't quite out yet, just at that point, not at that point, but. I finally got my machine, and I'll always admit I was never unhappy. I was never like, oh, I was screwed. But I also had a Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I think that was, it's interesting. You talk about, had they localized a lot of the games that were in Japan, it could have been different, or it might have been different. I always wonder, were a lot of the gems that were released in Japan maybe too culturally specific to Japan to have really worked? Like you talked about the Far East of Eden series.
Oh, yeah.
And while I would have loved to have that in English, and I've tried to play through it a little bit in Japanese, I mean, it was a wonderful, at least the first one, wonderful game.
Yeah.
Could that have worked?
No, it's so weirdly Japanese. I'm the first to admit it. But there's a lot of action games. There's a lot of great shooting games that never came out. There's, of all the strange games that we did get, like Battle Royale, that wrestling game that was really unusual.
Yeah.
The Addams Family. I'm not knocking China Warrior or anything like that, but China Warrior, when you first saw it, you're like, wow, because the characters were actually the size of the screen, which was impressive to 90s kids.
Oh, absolutely.
It really was.
It's so funny you mentioned Battle Royale, because I was a big pro wrestling fan.
Me too.
And I was like, oh my God, a wrestling game. I must have that. And I was, again, you're just going by a couple screenshots in a magazine, and I got it for some holiday. And I was so let down. I was like, oh, there's no WWF guys in here? I really want the acclaimed WWF game. I wish I could have that. And those games were terrible in hindsight. So I was like, oh, Battle Royale, you let me down.
If anybody wants to know about Battle Royale, they just need to watch Spider-1A's video on it.
Yes.
Who else can... He covered it perfectly. You can't cover it any better than that.
Yeah, that was and sadly they didn't bring over one of my favorite games. Probably my favorite sports game was the Fire Pro Wrestling. The very first one was actually a TurboGrafx game.
I don't know too much about that one. Like I never really followed wrestling PC Engine games, so that's interesting to hear about.
Yeah, it was. Very crude by the standards that this series eventually set, but it basically was kind of an isometric view of the ring. And at this time, they didn't have real characters, but it was you could really tell who they were emulating.
Yeah.
And it had basically all of the moves of pro wrestling, like down to just every single move you could think of. It was incredibly hard, but it eventually evolved into a series that even today, you have your 16-bit sprites, but very detailed kind of logic, so the wrestlers react as the real wrestlers do, or as close as possible.
Yeah. And
you got to a point where you would actually discover moves in the game that hadn't made their way to North American wrestling.
That's pretty cool.
Which was amazing.
When did you first play that game?
I played it... A friend had imported it for the Dreamcast. And that's when I discovered it. But of course, it went back, obviously, to the TurboGrafx, but it was on the Super Famicom, a great version on the Saturn. Wow. But yeah, he had imported it, and a very unique game. If you like Japanese wrestling and just Japanese style games, Fire Pro Wrestling is awesome.
I've heard the name, but I've never really looked into the series, so that's something I'll check out afterwards for sure. Like, it's funny, another game that's really, you got to scratch your head and you got to say, why the hell did they bring JJ and Jeff over here? Why did they bring that game? That game, I was playing it a couple of months ago because I bought a copy of a friend who was selling it really cheap. I'm like, I need to get the American version of that game. And I was playing it, and I was like, this game is so bizarre. Like, for an American audience, because they were two Japanese comedians. So why? Like, it's not. Nobody would even know who they are over here. Strange.
They brought that over, but they couldn't manage to bring over the really excellent port of Street Fighter 2.
I know. Yeah.
Which could have been licensing.
There might have been something going on with Nintendo, and I don't really know. But the Genesis got it with really bad sound, but it got it. And the PC Engine version is a pretty competent version.
Oh yeah, I actually hate to say it, I prefer it to the Genesis version.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it is good. You just need to get another a 6-button controller, and then you're okay.
You need the 6-button controller.
All that kind of stuff. But did you ever get so? You had the TurboGrafx, you never got the CD-ROM attachment.
I did not. No.
Yeah.
And it's funny because at some point I convinced my parents, and they had another crazy rule, like if I wanted to get a new system, I had to get rid of the previous system that I had.
Oh my! Wow! Like, if you don't mind my asking, what was going on with your parents? They're so, of all things, like I can understand, them, growing up to say, okay, don't go here, don't go there, but why micromanaging video game machines like that?
I have no idea. It's funny. I asked them about it fairly recently. I was like, why are you guys doing that? And they said, you know what? We don't really know. It seems kind of silly in hindsight.
Wow.
So they made me, actually, this is funny, because they made me, they're like, okay, if you don't like the TurboGrafx, you're going to have to give it away.
What?
And then you'll get the Genesis. So I did that. I gave it, they had friends who had little kids, so they gave it to those little friends, including all of my boxed games.
Oh my God.
And I was very meticulous about keeping the games in good condition. So they gave all of that away. And then I was able to get the Genesis and the Sega CD. But years later, they ran into those friends. They were like, oh, you remember that game system you gave us? We still have it.
Wow.
So I was like, hey, guys, could you ask for it back now that their kids are out of college?
What did they say?
They were like, oh, yeah, we'll see. We'll see when the time is right to bring it up.
The time is right? I'd phone them up and say, give me my TurboGrafx back now.
I want to find their number and be like, listen, come on, it was a terrible mistake. Give it back.
Yeah, I'm coming over now.
Yeah.
that is so, but I understand what you're talking about. My parents were so weird. I'd open a game up, and I remember even Rob, his parents did the same thing. Oh, you don't need the box. That's what they would say. Oh, throw the box away. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. It was like this outer packaging that you didn't need.
Yeah, I see. They weren't like that. I kept they had this thing about, like, I had to keep everything intact.
Yeah.
So I did have all the boxes. I even had those little, I don't know what you would call it, the styrofoam inserts. Yeah. Like now, if I had those complete copies, oh man, it's a killer.
It'd just be nice to have because it's part of your childhood. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've considered, like I imported a PC Engine a number of years ago now, and it was, I don't know, it wasn't in great condition, but I would really love to have the original US version. Sadly, they're getting kind of expensive, and certainly if you want the Turbo Duo or the R, whatever that was, you can't touch that for, I think, under $300.
And then usually, when you do get one, you do buy it off eBay, there's issues with them, like capacitor problems.
Yeah.
And thank God I have a friend in Ontario. When I went to visit my mom and sister, I was able to bring over my TurboGrafx, and he was able to fix it all up for me. And I'm putting component video cables.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
That was awesome.
Yeah. For a guy like me, that the TurboGrafx PC Engine means so much that I do play, like when I have my downtime, if I need to relax, I will have a beer and play the PC Engine, and it calms me down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've resorted to using a program called Magic Engine.
Yeah.
To relive those memories. But yeah, if I ever find one that's reasonable, I might jump on it. But sometimes if it's recapped, they're asking $500 or $600, and it's just like, there's so much you can do with that money.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's a horrible time to be an enthusiast of old retro systems and games.
Yeah.
I'm appalled, to be absolutely honest with you. Before I came onto YouTube, collecting video games was a very nice, fun thing that you could do with your friends and was just you're able to do. And I blame myself and I blame a lot of other YouTubers, and I don't mean it in a malicious, terrible way that we're bad people. But we came onto YouTube and started talking about this, and the prices went up, and then the whole culture of retro gaming changed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it starts off innocently. It's like, you guys were, back in the day talking about, a passion that I think a lot of us forgot, in the sense that when you came out, or when I discovered your channel, I was like, God, he's talking about all these games that I loved. I should really rediscover that for myself. Go back, play a lot of these games, find a lot of the stuff in my parents' basement that have been collecting dust for years. But then naturally you have the resellers, and they see a market and they corner it.
Oh, especially nowadays, like if you're a fan of a video game, like you have to pre-order it the first day if you want. Just say you were a really big fan of a game and you have to pre-order it that first day, or everybody buys it and puts it on eBay and scalps it. I mean, that's what I hate that stuff. I that's how it's all changed now. I don't know. I really I'm not being old here by saying this. I am so happy I grew up when I did. It was just like it wasn't a $1 billion industry thing like it is now, where, like with conventions and all that. There's nothing like that. It was just video games came out and you bought them and you read about them in game magazines, playing with your friends. Much simpler time. And I will be an old man say that. It was a much simpler time. Things have gotten so complex now. With the internet and everybody's arguing about games before they even released. It's so bizarre. So strange.
Well, I miss the days, even if you bought an expensive game like Chrono Trigger, I think came out at like $80 here.
It was $100 here, $99.
100.
Yeah.
But I think even at that price, you got your money's worth with that game. They made the best game they could, and they sold it at a fair price. I think today, with all of the microtransactions and day one DLC and season passes, they're just stringing you along.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that feeling.
There's something. DLC has become so complicated. Listen, honestly, this is my story. I was saying to Kim the other day, I'm like, you know what? Battlefront, I can pick it up for like $30 now. I'm like, used. I'm like, I should do that. So I started thinking about it. Then I went on. I was like, oh, I'll have to get like seasons passes and then extra levels. And I went online and I couldn't piece it together what I would need to do to get the whole package to play the full game. And I'm like, I just kind of swore. I said, fuck this. I didn't even understand this. Forget it. I was like, I got to buy $5 blasters and I got to buy a $20 map pack. And where's it? This is so, even for Street Fighter V, they just released the Pro Tour package. And I'm like, oh, but I just bought that costume, but I have to buy I'm so confused now.
It's sad. Well, basically what they want you to do is be like, screw it. I'll just buy the top of the line, whatever gold season pass and be done with it. That's unfortunate. It was funny, the Battlefront, I would just wait on that. I had Titanfall, and they did the same thing. They had all the different map packs and blasters, and eventually when people stopped caring about that game, they just gave it to you all for free.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And people still play Titanfall. I mean, I guess not as passionately as back when it came out, but I could still go on and have fun with it, and they gave you all the map packs, and we were good to go. And I think Battlefront's probably going to head in the same way.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that too. I'll just wait it out. I'm just a fanboy. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I was like, it'd be so much fun to run around and on Jakku or something like that. That'd be cool. And it's not really even the shooting aspects, because I don't want to play a full online game, but I was like, let's screw around and just maybe enjoy the Star Wars universe. But then I'm like, I don't even understand what game you're trying to sell me, so forget it. But sorry, back to the TurboGrafx and stuff. Like, what was your favorite game that you owned back then?
I would have to say, it's interesting. I really liked Bonk's Adventure and Bonk's Revenge.
Yeah.
And R-Type.
Oh yeah, R-Type was great.
I found myself playing those the most. I can't tell which is the better platformer. I kind of lean towards Bonk's Adventure because it was the first, really quality platformer that I played for the system.
Yeah.
What about you? What were some of your
Oh,
favorites?
geez, there's too many. It's so funny. There's a lot of people like yourself and Spider. I know Spider 1A hates Keith Courage, but for some reason I thought as a package, as a free game, I liked it. It was kind of I know it's very simple. It's not complex stuff. You finish it in the first time you sit down with it usually. But I guess Dragon's Curse was really good. If I'm just talking about chip games, Dungeon Explorer was awesome, but when you got into the CD stuff, that's when
CD.
you got into some really cool things. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
Yeah, go for it.
No, I was going to say, when the CD came out, I know you were talking about that story where it was like you knew you were getting it, you saw it in somewhere in your parents' house, and you were all excited, and you had Ease Books 1 and 2, which really was incredible. But it was funny, when I got the Sega CD, I remember kind of, again, having a slight bit of buyer's remorse, only because they had talked about what CD technology could do, and I think a lot of the games, at least on the Sega CD, seemed like Genesis games with good music. Did you have that feeling?
Absolutely. The thing that the TurboGrafx had for me was RPG of one of my favorite games in the Master System with orchestrated music. I was already like, yes, I'm in. And with a promise of other, role-playing games and things coming out. And there's a lot of other, Japanese-esque games. Where when I played, and I didn't get, the Sega CD the first day, I played friends of mine's versions. And I was like, oh, Sewer Shark. Oh, it's just kind of like a crappy, interactive movie. And I started playing all the games like that. And I was so... Yeah, as you're right, a lot of games are just ports with some better music sometimes. And I was like, geez, this is so disappointing. And it wasn't until Working Designs came out, started bringing out their games that I was like, okay, good. Like Lunar's coming out. Good, okay, something I really do want for this machine. But I wasn't in love with it to begin with at all.
Yeah, but it seemed like the Turbo CD, and especially the Japanese version, I mean, they really pushed the CD technology a lot better than Sega did here, I thought.
Well, there was a lot of really good Sega CD games that never came out over here. Like the Ninja Warriors CD stuff. Really unique games that were somewhat taking advantage of it, but unique games, and they never brought them out. I think they were saying, this is the U.S. market. Give them Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, that's what they want to see, and make your own music videos. That's what it was all about, this interactive music video MTV thing, and it sucked. Nobody wanted. People wanted to play Mario. People were still in love with platformers and RPGs and things like that, and they were willing to look past that to get to the good games, but they didn't come out with that way.
It's so funny you talk about those Marky Mark, Sewer Shark type games. I downloaded this EA Access for the Xbox, and they just released Need for Speed. So I downloaded that, and I haven't played a Need for Speed game in probably 15 years.
Yeah.
And so what it was an attempt at creating a Sega CD-like game. It was horrible acting where they're like, hey, dude, here's your car, go driving, and trying to weave this insane story. And, of course, the game was terrible. It ran at like 20 FPS. But even today, where it was in HD and they were almost trying to be ironic about it, was like, this was a terrible idea for games.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. I don't know. Have you watched GameSack, obviously, right?
Yeah.
If you ever see their Sega CD episode, it's so good because they recreate doing a Sega CD, like an interactive GameSack that is on the show. So in their episode, let me explain this better, is that at the end of the episode, they always do these little movies. And they do this movie saying, hey, help us make a GameSack episode. And it's the same as a Sega CD where you walk in, you're some recruit saying, sit down, recruit, you're going to help us make an episode. And then you press a button real quick, and if you don't, you're like, you screwed up. And it goes game over. It was really a lot of fun what they did. And they captured the essence of what those games were all about back then. Terrible acting, as you said. Terrible acting and characters talking at you like you're a part of it. And it's so hokey and stupid, right? Like, oh.
I've got to check that out. I think I actually missed that episode.
So did I until they mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, I better go see this. You better check this out.
Well, what was your favorite oddball Japanese title for the PC Engine? Because there were so many of these games that would never come out here, but that had a charm to them, I think.
Like on a
whether it's CD or HuCard.
I'm gonna say this is a game I've never talked about on the show, and I think in the future I am going to talk about it. And that is a little series called Cosmic Fantasy.
Cosmic Fantasy. I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
that.
it's an RPG series, obviously on the PC Engine, that did extremely well in Japan, and no one has ever heard of it over here, except for TurboGrafx fans, because it's the only game that ever came out. And in Japan, on the PC Engine, there was, Cosmic Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 4 had two games that made it 4. I had to double check. It's been a long time. That's off the top of my head, but we only got number 2. And it's just this weird RPG space kind of thing. It's not like Phantasy Star. It has the name Fantasy in it, but it's really weird. And Working Designs did a really unusual job translating it. They did a lot of really cheesy humor in it, but it's interesting. I don't know. I really want to do an entire episode and do a lot of research into it and really flesh it out about what this was. Do you have to understand, I finished Cosmic Fantasy back in 1992, and I've never, ever revisited it, ever. Isn't that
Well, that
so
sounds
weird? Yeah.
That sounds like a cool project. Yeah, I've never. I can't even think of the box art or anything. I just haven't heard
The
of it.
box art is terrible. This is from my memory as well. Is that I don't know why they got an American to do some terrible airbrushing. It's horrible. It's like oh geez, why was this done? And then you look at the Japanese art and it's wonderful, and you're like, why didn't you just go with this? I think they were scared again to make it too Japanesey and weird. And I'll be honest with you, the game is very, very weird in Japan. At that time in 1992, it's a very strange game for mass audiences to play. For me, it was like, oh, this is awesome. It's a Japanese RPG with cat characters that talk, and it was cool. I thought it was really awesome. There was even an animated series, OVA in Japan. So the series was really big on the PC Engine, but we never got it. Working Designs took a gamble, and the gamble did not pay off because the TurboGrafx had basically at that point died.
That's interesting. I wanted to sort of move into this question of Japanese culture. This game being a little bit too Japanese for us back in the day. But it's interesting. I don't think you've ever, or at least I can't remember you talking about, what was the point at which you were introduced to this emergent Japanese culture? Was it through video games? Was it through anime? When did you become conscious that these things that you loved were actually Japanese? Because it didn't immediately click for me when I very first got into gaming.
It goes back to, this is going to sound really weird, the late 70s, because I grew up at that time. Because I was born in 74 in England, and my parents would fly over to visit family in Canada. And I know this is going to sound so funny, but I remember I was in the basement of my uncle's place, and I was playing with his kids down there. We were all the same age. We must have been about 5-ish, 6-ish, or. And I just remember looking back at the television, and Space Cruiser Yamato was on TV, which was Star Blazers. And I don't know why. Isn't this amazing? I looked back being a 5 or 6-year-old in the 70s and went, oh, it's a Japanese cartoon. I don't know how I knew it. There was no adult that knew anything about that kind of stuff then. That was a really weird thing. And then the next time I ever knew about Japanese culture was in the early 80s, going to a mall with my parents, and there was a big Japanese section of this mall, and they were selling all sorts of different things. And I remember all these toys out, and this is we're talking 81, 82. And I remember seeing all these toys, and I'd pick the toy up, and there was a cartoon character on it. It seemed like a cartoon character. I didn't know it was called anime. And I was like, oh, wow, there's an entire show about this robot. And I was looking around this table, and I started to realize that all of these different robots, which are all robot shows in Japan at that time, all had their own unique shows. And I was like, this is amazing. And then Robotech started, and I started to realize the whole Japanese culture. And I just started to do a lot of research, and I started to, as much research as you could do in the 80s, started buying art books and American art books. I started kind of explaining things, started talking about this weird Japanese culture. And it was the Robotech Art 1 that really started to explain that cartoons were created in Japan for adults. And I was like, wow, really? My parents think cartoons are stupid. So I want to live in Japan where adults think, where they actually make cartoons for adults, because in my mind I was an adult, and so I was more the anime side of things. And it's really brought me into the culture of Japan. I found it fascinating, and it was so fascinating because nobody in high school, nobody in elementary school was into it, and everybody thought I was so weird for liking Japanese stuff. And that's what it was like in the 80s and 90s. You were not patted on the back for knowing every single show like you are nowadays. You were condemned and thought to be a weirdo, and you never talked to women about being into anime. I remember being very embarrassed about being into anime and not talking about it, and that I like Japanese music and Japanese cartoons. So sorry, that's a long answer, but it's fascinating because I do come from a very unique time, and that's why I definitely want to mention it, because it's so weird.
And it seemed like there was a scene there in Vancouver where you had access to, you said with the mall, and you always talk about the Japanese mall that you went to.
Yeah.
Here we didn't have that. For me, there was always something different about video games, and some of the anime that was on television, you couldn't see much of it. And I just so much preferred it to whatever else was on television, or like my parents would be watching Matlock, and I'd want to just kill me. I want something different.
What was your first introduction to Japanese cartoons? Like, what was the first thing that you saw that you remember?
It was probably Robotech.
Yeah.
Of course, I was like, oh, what is this thing about robots? I'll watch it for a little bit. Like, there was no way to go beyond whatever was on television. And it's strange, and I'm not really an anime expert, but I want to say that things like the original Transformers cartoon and things like He-Man and Ghostbusters, they all had that style to it.
Yeah.
And I don't know where they were animated.
A lot of it's animated in Korea.
Korea, okay.
A lot of that stuff.
So, and then I was a little bit later in high school, I had a friend that really was an anime fan, and we'd watch it a little bit, but for me, it was kind of funny because I would be so into the video games and all of that. And at some point, my parents were like, that stuff you like is Japanese, right? It's not even American.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, I kind of do know that.
Your parents are very, very knowledgeable about that.
Yeah. And I was okay with that. But for me, it was kind of strange. The only place where you had, or at least that I could find, a real connection to this stuff where you're talking about the toys and, probably also some import games. For us, it was in hobby shops. I don't know if did you have like the general hobby shop that did games, baseball cards,
it's so
stuff like
funny
that?
that you say that, like model shops, because you go in. That was another big one for me in the 80s that I was going to bring up, and I'm like, I'm not going to rattle on too much about it. You go in and back in the 80s and stuff, you would build tanks, you'd build models. That was a big thing that people did with their time because they didn't have the internet. And while you were there, as you know, you'd look and say, "Hey, what's this robot? What is this?" Like, I remember I knew about Valkyrie fighters, which were the Veritech fighters in Robotech, before I'd even seen Robotech in '85. I already knew what they were because I'd seen them in model stores.
Huh.
And I saw, the very first time I saw the SDF-1 from Macross was in 1982 in that mall, and I bought it, and I didn't know what it was.
Wow, it's funny when you talk about the models. I remember I had an uncle who worked for a toy company, and he'd always go to these toy shows, and he would never bring back anything. And basically for Christmas or my birthday, I'd always get like a pair of socks from him. But for whatever reason, one year he got me like a Zambot, I think it was.
I know that, yeah.
It was like a huge toy. I mean, larger than any other toy that I had. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. What is this? And then I guess it was only later that I discovered what it was. And I still don't think I've ever seen that, whatever that was, that anime or read that manga.
Yeah.
But it was just this huge thing, and it was so unique at the time. Like, you didn't see a lot of that stuff.
I know, we're so desaturated now, aren't we?
Yeah. When you had those little tidbits, it really was something truly unique. Like, none of my other friends had a Zambot or knew what it was.
Yeah, and what would be so interesting is that they probably wouldn't even care. That's how I felt. I remember finding out that there was a Macross, Robotech, kind of movie in Japan, and I was ranting to my friends about it in 1987, and they're all like, okay, like this guy's completely nuts. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, like we got Robotech here, but they have Macross in Japan, and they have a movie version of it, like animated with state-of-the-art animation and all the Valkyries, the Strike Valkyries, and everybody's like, oh God.
Yeah, I found it the same way. I mean, I had friends who really were gamers, but as soon as it went into the RPGs or the Japanese stuff, it was like, to them it was dumb.
It was weird. Yeah.
Like if you weren't talking about Madden or NBA Jam or stuff like that, I would show them like, hey, here's the Breath of Fire write-up in EGM. Doesn't that look great? And they'd be like, whatever.
Yeah.
So it was something that you kind of had to do. It was like a little clandestine personal hobby for a while. I did, like I said, in high school, find a couple friends who were into the RPGs, and this one guy who was into anime, and that's how I kind of got into it, but not as intensely as you did. It seemed like you were in the right place at the right time.
It pretty much was, and that's why I say that I'm so glad that I grew up when I did. Is not because I remember the very first time going to my local Pharmasave and picking up Transformers, the comic book, which was the first one, and it was the beginning of popular culture as we know it now. I remember in like 1989, Batman the movie came out. It really, obviously we had Spider-Man, Superman, which was the other big, kind of superhero movie. But it was the beginning of superhero movies. It was the beginning of everything. They had some of the best movies in the 80s. Everybody's emulating them now. Have a look at Ghostbusters and Total Recall and RoboCop. They're just remaking all of the classics from the 80s. But it was a beautiful time. And I never used the word nerd. It was a beautiful time to be an enthusiast of like, animation and video games and Japanese culture. It was wonderful because it was fresh. It was new. You hadn't played a million RPGs at that point.
Yeah.
You hadn't seen a million robot animes. Zambot, stood out to you because you hadn't seen anything like that. It's cool. And I find nowadays I feel bad for people growing up now because it's oversaturation.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I'm going to totally sound prejudiced with this question, but when I look back, particularly to like the anime from I would guess 1985 to 1995, to me it's superior to anything that I've seen recently.
Mm-hmm.
It just had that artistic and thematic freshness to it that I think is lost.
There's like a heart with it.
Yeah.
And the thing is what I always do is I like to talk to actually a few reviewers, YouTube reviewers of anime that are much younger than me, that are much more in the new and the newer stuff. And I talked to them and I said, it could be just because I'm older that I like all this stuff. They're like, no, the old stuff is cooler. Like it actually is. Like, there's a few gems that come out every once in a while, but the 80s and 90s was a cesspool of creativity out of Japan, and as much as it was the West, like anime and movies out of America were influencing each other.
Yeah.
Like The Thing influenced so much anime. The Terminator influenced so much anime, and vice versa. And it was a really give and take between our cultures and you create some beautiful results where now Japan is almost making shows for the West at times.
Yeah.
Which is,
I don't know.
I don't know if I like it as much in that way.
My theory about why it was so great at that time was because, particularly in Japan, but I guess also here with things like Blade Runner, they were kind of exploring the dystopian future, and they kind of, I think, perfectly captured this almost tension between the possibility of a high-tech future and the danger.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just so like something like Bubblegum Crisis.
I thought exactly you were talking about that when you were saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love just even the visuals, or like Akira, just seeing whatever they call that, like Neo Tokyo.
Yeah.
Just that tension was like oozing from every frame of those movies. And I actually, not to sound depressing, but I think they were so far ahead of the curve. I think a lot of the dangers that they were wrestling with, not obviously robots dressed as people blowing things up, but that tension between technology being incredibly dangerous but incredibly liberating is what we're living in today.
Yeah. You're right. They were so ahead of the curve. And maybe this is me, and I don't mean to offend anybody out there who's listening. There's like, no, like, but I find a lot of the anime now very, the character designs are very generic. I find it's very cutesy. I don't get me wrong. I'm not some like freaking guy that's like, I hate cute things. I'm not like that, but it just seems overly cutesy with anime now. I was looking at Macross Delta, which is the brand new Macross from Japan, and there's like 5 idol singers that look like something from Sailor Moon, and I'm like, what has happened? Like Macross used to be like a really serious science fiction show. They're losing the hardcore science fiction aspects, I feel. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what they call that, but that cute girl thing where they look like 10 and they're magical and...
You know, there used to be a name, they used to call it like something magical girl anime, like the magical something anime. That used to be a term in the 90s. I can't remember what it is now, but yeah. But that used to be a certain genre, but now it's turned into something like, I don't know, man. I don't know anymore.
And I think the sad part is it's bleeding into a lot of modern JRPGs.
Absolutely.
You know, that art style and that kind of lack of really imaginative storytelling.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, in the 90s, I could tell the different character designers. Now, I might not have been able to pronounce their names correctly, but I was like, that's the same guy who does this character for this show, and vice versa. And I used to be able to know everybody who did everything. I felt quite knowledgeable about that fact. Where now I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, see, I wasn't at that level. I just knew that it looked great, and I kind of took it for granted, like, this stuff is always going to be coming out of Japan, and I'll have my whole life to experience it. But then now with the streaming sites and stuff like that, when I looked to see what was really out there today, I was like, oh, things have changed.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I don't want to be that older guy going, I don't like new stuff, but I'm not saying that at all. I like, Attack on Titan. I like One Punch Man. Let me tell you, Will, you need to watch One Punch Man.
One Punch Man? Okay.
Wonderful. And it's only, I think, 13 episodes. I mean, I've watched it twice. I never do that. Trust me, when you get a bit older, your time is everything. And me and Kim watched it all the way through, and we loved it. And then my friend Andrew came over to visit, and we sat and watched all the episodes. We sat down on the couch in one day and watched all the episodes. It was so good.
Oh, I have to look that up. Yeah, there's been a couple that I've liked, but I'm a fan of mahjong, Japanese mahjong.
Oh, are you?
So I love that Akagi series, which I thought was brilliant. But you kind of have to know the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was ever like there's a fan translation, but that's about it. But then they did the same guy did one called Kaiji the Gambler.
Yeah.
And I thought this was absolutely brilliant. It was basically about how an evil billionaire uses people in extremely desperate financial situations to basically be pawns in this huge gambling sport. And of course, they're always gambling their lives against some immense financial reward. And this one character, Kaiji, makes it to like the final round. It was better than I'm describing it there, but
no, it sounds cool. Yeah,
smartly done.
Yeah. So yeah, there is definitely some diamonds in the rough, and I think the problem is getting through all the trash and getting to the good stuff. And I can say that now because there is so much goddamn trash.
Yeah.
And there's good stuff in there, but you just gotta find it. And my problem is I don't even know who to trust anymore. Who do I trust to give me the right anime reviews? I don't even know who to trust anymore. I don't know who to listen to.
Well, I mean, I don't, like I said, it's not my biggest hobby. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of anime that just I'm never going to find. But I always like that guy, Brent, from the Otaku no Video. I don't always necessarily agree with everything that he's talking about or would really want to watch everything that he's reviewed, but I think he really is knowledgeable.
I honestly love Brent. I followed him for probably as many years as you have, and I know in passing we've talked about him before. Yeah. I'm a big fan of him because he is a real fan, and he's a real 90s fan. You know what I mean? You just know that with that guy. And I've actually tuned into him just cooking, talking about anime. And I'd be sitting there and I'm like, man, I'm a really big fan of this guy because he's just being so real and honest, and he's just cooking some donuts or whatever the hell he's doing, making dinner, and he's just talking to you about anime. And I always try to catch his live stuff, and I seem to have missed it lately. I don't catch it as much as I've been able to.
Yeah, well, what I like about him is even though in some cases, I have no idea what he's talking about, he always communicates it so clearly and engagingly that I can say, okay, well, I may not like, this particular genre of anime, but I can appreciate what he's saying.
Yeah.
And I have discovered some stuff through him.
Yeah. His format has changed so much over the years. It used to be just him, and then he started doing a kind of a podcasty show with another friend of his.
Yeah.
And then I haven't been, probably in the last 7 months, 8 months, I have not been up to date with what he's been doing. I don't know what he's doing now. I need to follow up with that.
Yeah, he's basically doing, like, he'll pick up a topic and then talk about all the different shows and manga that relate to that topic. So, like, he'll do Christianity in anime or the representation of food in anime.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, he's really into anime. When you think about it, like you're kind of a casual fan. I'm a little bit more of an aggressive fan, but he's a hardcore fan.
Yeah, yes.
To be talking about like food and anime and stuff, that's a certain kind of level. That's pretty cool. So
just one more anime related question, and it kind of ties back into the TurboGrafx. When I first started reading about the PCFX, the next console in the line there from NEC, I was excited about it. But then when I discovered that like they had gone so far down like the visual novel,
hentai,
all of that, I think like that's a very sad end station for the PC Engine. Because the PC CD, it had such a wide variety of games, and it brought anime and video games very close together, particularly for that time period. But then to see it end like that, I don't know. What were your thoughts? I was kind of depressed.
There was a few things going on there. Like, remember, there was the PC Engine, and there's a couple of versions of the PC Engine, like Shuttle and all that. And then there's obviously the combined unit, the Turbo Duo kind of R and all that stuff. There was that. But then their next big push was the super graphics. And I think they really misjudged they should have made it more powerful. It was a very underpowered machine, very lightly ahead of the PC Engine, and it did not fly in Japan. And there must have been development on it, and you got to understand that even back then, that stuff must have cost a lot of money to develop at that time. You look at the technology now, you're like, oh, that's primitive, but at that time it was cutting edge. And I think it just bombed, and then they came out with the PCFX, and they didn't do that one right, and all of a sudden the Super Nintendo was going ahead, and times changed.
Yeah.
And they didn't, if they had come out with the super graphics and it was like better than the Super Nintendo, they could have done something. They could have been big, but they didn't.
Yeah.
I just know it's sad. Like, I was into the PCFX. I was like, oh, look at all these anime games. This is like heaven for me, especially in the 90s. But then when I started to do some research, when I actually looked at the machine, I'm like, oh, it's just like a big PC. It was like, I just didn't like the visualization of the machine. I didn't like the games. The only game I liked was the Far East of Eden game on it.
Yeah.
But that was it. There was nothing else that even grabbed my attention. And after that, the PC Engine was pretty much, done in Japan. Well, it's already the whole, PC Engine legacy leading up to that was done in Japan.
Yeah, although, it's strange. There was a news story that came out that was actually tied to the original PC Engine ecosystem. Apparently, one of the companies that distributed the software specifically for Hudson and some of the hardware was actually in that book that you recommended recently.
The Untold History of Japanese Game Development.
Yeah, so it was a company called SoftBank, and they were just basically a software distributor, but I guess they grew into an internet service provider, and they just bought ARM, the company that makes the chips for, I guess, smartphones, for $32 billion.
Oh, my God.
So, in a strange way, a little bit of PC Engine history in the news.
So, this was the company that developed all this stuff back then, and...
Well, they were the distributor, so I guess like for Hudson, so when Hudson came out with software for the PC Engine and I guess whatever else, all the other Japanese computers they were developing for, this was the company that sold it.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if I want to say that they also sold like the PC Engine hardware, but they were just, as far as I understand it, like a retail store. Maybe they were like
A manufacturer, distributor type of thing.
yeah, like just a reseller.
Yeah.
But they started just distributing things like Ease, and then they grew into one of the major technology companies, and now they don't know if the deal's going to be approved, but their offer was accepted, $32 billion in cash for ARM.
Oh, that just that doesn't that just they must know something that we don't because that seems like an awful lot of money for some chips.
Well, I mean, those are the chips, I guess, that are in all of the iPhones. And supposedly they're going to make their way into, the Internet of Things, like they'll be in your refrigerator and your toilet seat or whatever else.
But geez, they're gonna make their money back on that.
Yeah, but also they decided to buy it because I think the British pound is so low after the Brexit. They were like, this is the time to strike.
What is the British what is the British pound at right now?
I haven't checked it today, but after they voted to leave the EU, it basically lost like 35%.
Yeah.
And that was at the beginning of July. So it's come back a little bit, but obviously if you're making a $32 billion acquisition, now's the time to do it.
Be the time to do it. Absolutely. Yeah. Great.
So I've just got two more questions for you. I know time is, you're good enough to come on and chat with me after work and everything, but I have two somewhat biographical questions that I've always wanted to ask you, and I hope you're okay.
Oh, you can ask me anything. Sure.
Yeah. So you talked about how you took a break from Canada. You went back to England as a young guy, and
Yes.
I kind of did the same thing, although I went to Germany.
Oh, did you go to Germany? Wow.
Yeah, I did 2 years of college in Germany. And for me, when I went over there, I completely stopped gaming simply because none of the young people were gaming. This was like 2001, 2002, 2003, sort of spanning those years. And I was wondering, like, what was gaming like for you when you left and lived in England?
It's very interesting because I'm going to do an entire episode on it.
No,
it's all good. I did like it's not. It was very Canada and America was rocking with releases and stuff like that, and it was really interesting back in this would have been 1994, I think. But at that time, when I went over to England and I was staying with my grandmother and I was there for like 5 months, which is a long time. And I'd go up to the malls and I would check out the video game retailers and I was like, I was so disappointed with Europe and the video game scene of that time. Growing up in Canada and the video game scene here, it was rich, it was alive, the culture was really good. And I went there and it just felt like they were backwards. I remember I'd go into a video game store and it was all these PC boxes and it was all misorganized and there was no really good retailers of gaming, and you'd get in there and you're like, okay, where's the latest games? And they weren't there. And so what ended up happening is I ended up hanging out with a group of people. I started doing fanzines out there because that's what you did before the internet. And I got to know a lot of the real hardcore video gamers in England at the time. And they were all complaining to me. They were all so upset that America was so big to, for releases, and England felt so ripped off. They're like, they always get like Final Fantasy 3 and Final Fantasy 2 and Chrono Trigger, and we don't get anything. And all these fans had to import all their machines and bring them over and play on NTSC TVs. It was a lot of work, and it was a really big expense. And it was a big expense to be an RPG fan in the early 90s in England. And people were very, very bitter. People were very big fans, but they hated how hard they had to work to play games that get to play in America. But so I'll be honest, when I came back to Canada, I was so happy, and I really settled into coming back to Canada. I was like, yeah, the anime scene, the video gaming scene, the Japanese scene in Vancouver is so awesome that I'm gonna stay here. And I went back to England a bunch of times, but I never, I never embraced it as a place to really video game at or get into Japanese culture. And I have a lot of stories about England. I'll use those in later episodes. But what did you find for when you went to Germany? Did you just kind of like unplug?
Yeah, well, I definitely unplugged. I wasn't trying to. Like, if I had found, like you did, sort of passionate gamers over there, I probably would have gravitated to them. But as a young person, 19, 20 in the university setting, video game, I mean, no one played video games. You couldn't talk about it.
Wow.
If you told someone that you were into it, they'd have this perplexed look on your face. There was almost a kind of leeriness towards gaming.
It's almost a racism towards video games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's funny.
And there was one guy, and I went over to his place, and he had a PlayStation. I was like, oh, cool, you got a PlayStation. What do you play? He said, FIFA. I said, okay, well, you got any other games? Nope, FIFA. This is just FIFA. Like, the machine to him was FIFA.
Welcome to Europe.
Yeah, and that was it. And it was strange because it was a period of my life where, aside from coming home for like the holidays once, I didn't play games for a solid year and a half to 2 years.
Now, were you such a video game fan that did you miss it? Or did you just go, okay, maybe it was something I did when I was younger, maybe it's time to grow up?
I did feel that way. I was like, okay, I'm in Europe, I'm young, I'm going to enjoy everything I can here in Europe. And I was like, okay, that was, I missed it, I guess, a little bit at the beginning, but it was like, okay, that was my former life. And of course, you're discovering all sorts of travel opportunities, girls, parties, and you just sort of forget about it. But when I look back, I'm just like, wow, I don't know that I'll ever have a stretch again where I just simply don't play. There are times where I just don't have the time for it. I might play like for a half hour a week or something.
Yeah.
But, never like that. And it's gotten better because I do go back to Germany pretty frequently. And it's better. Kids, I think, are, there's no import restrictions. They can get everything that we get pretty much at the same time. And it's grown, but it's still not like it is here.
Yeah. I know that Europe got a lot of anime and things that we never got. Like they actually had, like in France, they had Nadia, playing, and that's
okay.
I think they even had Nadia. Actually, Hanzo, my friend, told me that like Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, was playing in Germany. Yeah. So
okay.
It's fascinating. So it was getting over there, but it was, I think, still very underground at that time in the early 90s.
Yeah. So my last question is a question I've been dying to ask you.
Oh, really?
Yes. What is the future of nostalgia?
Huh.
And I'm referring here to like nostalgia as a genre of internet content. And you are, I think, one of the creators of the genre and one of the best voices in the genre. So, like, is there going to be a second wave, you think, for things like PS2, Xbox 360? Will it always be focused in the 80s and 90s, or will it run its course?
It was interesting. I forget who I was talking to the other day, and we were talking about something, and somebody said, yeah, kids are going to be nostalgic about Call of Duty. And it's like, it's fascinating. I was like, yeah, like that's something that's going to happen. And I think, for me, the reason why, I'm just going to speak personally, is like why I've done the show and why I've taught nostalgically is because I think it encompasses a certain time period, and I think it's very important to record that time period. And I am getting older. It's just, you're going to find this funny. But a lot of the things I've talked about, I talked about 8 years ago in the show, I watch now, I'm like, oh, good, I'm glad I recorded that because I've forgotten that. It's funny how that is, isn't it? So it's like, oh, geez, this is almost like recording what it was like in the 80s and 90s and late 70s. It's important for maybe kids in the future might be interested in it. Maybe they won't be. It's, it's for them. Time will tell. But I think kids will grow up with their own shows. And like, I look at my nephew, and he's growing up and he's watching all these Nickelodeon, Disney shows and stuff like that, and I rewatched them with him when I was staying with my mom and sister, and I was like, oh, and I'm so nostalgic that I'm already thinking he's probably going to be nostalgic about this in the future, and what's he going to be nostalgic about? And that's what I always think about. And it might be video games, it might be a show, it might be sports. So we're all nostalgic about. I think it's inherent in people to be nostalgic. We always look back, and it's not because we're caught in the past, but they bring back fond memories. right? And it's a way that other people can tap in and go, oh wow, yeah, like they can relate to fond memories. And maybe that's something, and that's why. And I thank you. You did an episode a long time ago talking about my format and what I do. And there's a lot of times that I doubted what I do. Sometimes I'm like, man, all I ever do is talk about nostalgia. And then I sometimes think back to the episode you made, and I thought, no, that's my unique thing, and that's what it's all about for me. It's like I'm not just a technical show where I talk about technical things. Press A to jump, press B to. It's not that type of show. It's always been about nostalgia and what it was like to grow up. As much as it is for you, I think I've noticed in you that you do the same kind of format. You talk a lot about your childhood growing up and what it was like for you and all of that, because it's important, you know what I mean? Like, it's interesting. When I came onto YouTube, nobody did that. You have to understand, when I came on and I built my shelf of video games, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to sit in front of a shelf of video games and talk about my memories playing video games. People are going to laugh at me. And I really, really was ready for that. I was like, they're gonna, and people did laugh at me. And a lot of people did, but a lot of people didn't. And that was what was wonderful, and it caught on over the years. And since then, a lot of people, everybody talks about their memories playing video games now, and I'm quite happy about it. I'm quite happy about it.
Well, and I said in that video, it's a kind of method almost for talking about it, because you want to capture the lived experience of these games. I mean, it's one thing to talk about, oh, the graphics look like this, or this was a play mechanic.
Yeah.
But I think so much of the magic of gaming is going back, how did it feel to be hyped for this game, to get it? What did it mean for you at the time? It's a kind of historical embeddedness.
It's a human experience. And I think I've never really talked about it, is when I watch somebody, I want to hear about their human experience with that game, because the game is just plastic and chips. Who gives a shit about that? But what did it mean? What did it mean to that human being? So I can relate to it, and I'm like, oh wow. And then a lot of what that does is it awakens memories inside of myself when I hear somebody else's story, and that's what it has to be, because you can describe a video game in mechanical, like going, yeah, you jump, you you go up this way, you do this, you do that, you beat that dungeon, you move on. That's robotic, and that kind of kills the humanity of us being people. And I know that sounds like all cheesy because we're playing video games here, but we're human beings playing video games. I think everybody forgets that. You know what I mean? That it's okay to be emotional and share memories about playing video games. It's a wonderful thing. That's, Yeah.
And it was more, I think, for our generation, it was more than just content.
Yeah.
This is just content, this is an intellectual property, and 6 months later you'll get the next thing. It had a personal meaning because, as you said, it wasn't, the market wasn't overrun with it. I mean, it's funny, I have a cousin who's a younger guy, and he plays a lot of cell phone games. And I remember, this was a number of years ago, I don't know if you remember the whole, Infinite Runner craze, where they would play, I don't know what those games were called. So I checked it out on my phone, and about a month or two later, I saw him, and I said, oh, I'm playing the Infinite Runner game. And he was like, oh, that's old, that's gone. Within the span of a couple months. So I wonder if they might say, oh yeah, back in high school I was playing that game, and have that nostalgia, but not at the depth that, say, you have presented it. I wonder if that is going to change.
I think the term you want to use is a discardable content.
Yeah.
Like Kim plays a lot of games that are like that on her iPhone, and to her it's discardable content. But when she goes to play Persona, or she's playing the new Mirage Sessions FE, she's talking about it with emotion. She's like, oh, I really love this game. Oh, it reminds me of Persona. I miss playing Persona. I miss those characters. And the human emotion comes out. So I think it depends on what it is, and depends on the person. And I have a heart to believe that these kinds of emotions will continue on with people, that every game isn't just... I believe there's a lot of kids out there experiencing a game for the very first time that is emotionally doing something for them. I really hope so. I really hope so. Or we're just old, and we're holding on to this stuff way too tightly.
No, I do think at the very, at that level of just remembering certain periods in your life, I think it will definitely continue. And I also think with VR, it might change. People might remember their first VR experience
Yeah.
as being something foundational, and depending on how that develops, they might have, I think, a deeper connection to that type of game than they will the cell phone game or the AAA PlayStation 4 game.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe the experiences have to change and evolve to get an involvement of human emotion. Isn't that bizarre to say? But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe the whole medium has to change.
Well, it's happening. It's underway. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will. It's gonna be fascinating what happens with VR in the future.
Yeah, I'm tempted. I'm so tempted now that I have a new computer to get the Vive.
I'm telling you, I'm telling you right now, you got to do it. It's life changing. It's life changing.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's like I talk about it like a drug. That when me and Kim came home from that VR experience, and I put it all out there for everybody to see a video of it.
It was a good video. Yeah.
Yeah, it was life changing, and me and Kim got home, and I would say that I'm more of an obsessive fanboy about things than Kim is. But Kim was getting into bed that night, and she's just laying down, and she looks up at me, and she's like, "I can't stop thinking about VR." She's like, "I can't stop thinking about that experience." I'm like, "Me too." Like I said, it's so life changing. She's like, "I know," and it felt like something was really changing. Like there's really a change coming because the experience was so profound, and I really would love for you to at least experience it if you could go to a friend's place or know somebody and just have an experience with it. You don't have to shell out all the bucks for it, but just feel the experience of it, like experiencing Mario Brothers for the first time or Mario 64 or anything like that. It's that the change is so wow. And I'm putting out a video tomorrow on the PlayStation VR. I got a chance to try it out, and the HTC Vive is much better.
Okay.
Yeah, but the PlayStation VR, I'm not taking away from that, but the HTC Vive is like the Cadillac, and PlayStation VR is like a Honda. They both are great, but one is a bit more of a souped up model, pretty much. So if you can afford it, do it.
I may pull the trigger on it. I have a kind of a cramped game room, so I'm not sure. Like, I know they have those sensors, and I can't really move around and all around the room because I've got so much stuff in here. I was just always wondering, like, is that going to prevent me from using it?
I think you need to have a big living room and just say, you do? Me and Kim, we without question, we said, yeah, we just push all the couches, everything out of the way. We didn't even care because the experience is so immersively awesome that get rid of that couch and get rid of that TV because you don't need it no more.
Wow.
So that's that good. So,
well, then I on that recommendation, I may have to do it.
I would just like to hear your experience, like when I'll put out a video tomorrow. Check it out because you can just see my experience playing the VR, Helmet Kim's experience, and some local people that were at the local EB where they were trying it out, and you can see what they thought of it. It's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Johnny, I really appreciate you doing this episode. It has been certainly a high point for me to finally talk to one of my inspirations.
Well, thank you.
And it was awesome. So thanks so much.
No problem. And
And that will do it for episode 8 of the Retro Critical Podcast. A couple of things I just want to talk about here at the end. One, I want to make a correction to a statement I made in the last episode where I expressed a fair bit of cynicism about ESPN broadcasting the EVO 2016 fighting game tournament. I was totally wrong about that. They did a wonderful job. I kind of feared that the announcing would be terrible and that they would build in commercial breaks that you didn't typically see in the Twitch broadcast. Well, they didn't do that. The announcing was very solid. The announcers were excited, but not as insanely exuberant to the point of irritation as you see on Twitch. They did also a very good job of kind of giving the backstory of the fighters, particularly the Long Island Joe. This was the only American left in the top 8. They gave kind of I would say a basic but competent narrative of the game mechanics to an audience that might not be familiar with them. It wasn't a kind of consistent functional vocabulary, but they kind of did enough so that I think the sports fan that isn't familiar with fighting games could follow along and get into it and understand some of the strategies at a basic level. And there were no built-in commercials whatsoever. I thought they would sort of have extended commercial breaks between sets of a game, but they really didn't. They just did the exact same structure as Twitch, and whereas Twitch sort of just went silent or showed you an advertisement on screen, they would just run a commercial. It was a very quick commercial. They got back into the action. And of course, the production values were very good. So thumbs up to ESPN for a terrific job, really, of broadcasting this tournament. And let's hope that they do other slickly produced video game content in the future. Now, before I step out here, the last thing I want to say here is that it occurred to me as I was editing this podcast that, you know, I had this really enjoyable conversation with Johnny, and we ended with him giving me a fairly positive nudge in the direction of VR. And then, of course, my experience that I detail here in this broadcast was negative. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, oh, I took Johnny's advice and I was trashing his advice. That's not the case. His advice was kind of the last push I needed. Obviously, I talked about having built a new gaming PC and wanting to get into VR. I had actually been, prior to the podcast, on some of the forums and the subreddits, kind of asking people's opinions. And so I got a lot of positive feedback from a lot of people in the direction of virtual reality. So I hope that the listeners didn't take it as me kind of like putting my authoritative opinion out there and then playing the interview with Johnny at the end to sort of make my opinion seem, or to make him look bad or anything like that. That certainly wasn't the intent. And I hope it didn't come off that way. Plus, I was evaluating the Rift. He was talking about the Vive, and the Vive in a big room may well be a transformative experience. I'd like to try it. There is no place around here to do that. I don't have any friends who have it either. So, you know, I didn't want to make it seem like I was in some way criticizing his position. And like I said, I think, and what I hope that I sort of put out there with the last analogy that I gave you about VR is that it is hopeful. It is there's really a bright future. I just didn't think, for my purposes, for my vision anyway, that it was where it needs to be right now. So I thank you guys for listening to this podcast, 8th podcast. I'll be back in August with number 9. And if you want to send me questions or comments, obviously please do so on the YouTube version in the comments. If you listen to this as a podcast, send me a tweet, my Twitter handle, at GameEscape, at game_escape_, as it were. It's all in the show notes, which you can find pretty much now on every platform. And I guess I've sort of neglected to request this or ask for this, but it occurred to me that you can leave reviews on iTunes, and supposedly that helps the podcast get discovered. So if you are enjoying it and you feel it's worth your time, go on there, give it a rating. I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next month.